The streets of Rome were unusually quiet that morning, though the city had never truly slept. Shadows stretched across the marble squares, the columns of the Senate casting long lines like fingers pointing toward the sky. People whispered in small groups, their voices heavy with fear and uncertainty. It had been almost a year since Julius Caesar's death, yet the wounds of the city were still fresh. Rumors of conspiracies, betrayals, and shifting loyalties flowed through the alleys like water, and no one, not even the soldiers who marched proudly in their bronze armor, could say what tomorrow would bring. Gaius, a young legionary barely 20 summers old, tightened his cloak around his shoulders as he walked toward the Forum. His boots echoed softly against the stone roads. He had fought briefly under Caesar himself, seen the glimmer of triumph and the sting of betrayal, and now he served Augustus, the man who claimed to bring peace to the city. Peace, Gaius thought, could feel so distant in a place where every shadow seemed to hide a dagger. Across the Forum, a baker named Marcus swept the steps of his shop. Flour dusted his hands and the air smelled of fresh bread, a faint sweetness amid the anxiety that hung like a fog over the city. Marcus had been awake before dawn, listening to the distant clamor of merchants, the low murmur of senators, and the occasional clanging of armor as soldiers prepared for whatever the day might demand. He had survived the chaos that followed Caesar's death, watched neighbors vanish in sudden arrests, and wondered every night if Augustus would truly bring the peace he promised. In the center of the city, Augustus stood silently in his private courtyard, the sun just beginning to rise behind the tall pillars. His face was calm, but inside, thoughts swirled like the Tiber in flood. He had spent years planning, maneuvering, and carefully choosing his allies. Every smile he gave, every nod, every word in the Senate was a calculated step towards stability. Yet, Augustus' new power was never secure. One misstep, one careless word, and the fragile balance of Rome could shatter. Gaius arrived at the city gates, where soldiers were gathering. Augustus had called for a meeting with key military leaders. Not in the Senate this time, but in a private hall near the Palatine Hill. Rumors suggested Augustus intended to restructure commands, reward loyalty, and perhaps even hint at future laws that would solidify his authority. Gaius, heart-pounding, wondered what this meant for the legions, for the city, and for his own uncertain future. The city seemed to hold its breath as Augustus emerged. His robe flowing gracefully, a simple laurel wreath atop his head. There was no arrogance in his walk, no flourish of pride. Instead, a quiet confidence that demanded respect without shouting. His eyes scanned the gathering of men and women, seeing not just soldiers and senators, but the hopes and fears that clung to every Roman citizen. Gaius felt a strange calm at that moment, as if the city itself exhaled. Marcus, meanwhile, kept to the shadows, watching from a distance. He had heard whispers of Augustus's cleverness, of how he had turned enemies into allies and rivals into cautious supporters. The baker could not know the full depth of Augustus' strategies, but he understood the essence. This man moved like water, flowing into every crack of Roman power, filling it, reshaping it, and yet leaving a surface calm that comforted those who looked upon it. The meeting concluded without a single raised voice, but the intentions were clear. Augustus would not declare himself king. Yet the city would bend to his influence. Laws would be passed subtly, commanders appointed discreetly, and Rome would slowly, almost imperceptibly, begin to feel a sense of order returning after decades of unrest. Gaius and his fellow soldiers returned to their posts, the sun climbing higher, warming the stones beneath their feet, and with each step a quiet hope took root. As evening fell, Marcus closed his shop and walked toward his small home, carrying a basket of bread for his family. He reflected on the events of the day, on the faces of soldiers and citizens alike. The city had survived much, and while Augustus's rise was careful and calculated, it carried with it a promise of peace, fragile as it might be. The baker wondered if his children would grow up knowing Rome as a city of stability rather than fear. Night settled gently over the city, the moon casting silver light upon the streets. Augustus walked through his private gardens, alone for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing against him. He had seen Rome's fragility firsthand. He had lived through betrayal, murder, and political collapse. And now, as he gazed at the stars mirrored in the fountains, he understood that leadership required more than power. It required patience, foresight, and the quiet strength to hold the city together without breaking it. Gaius, resting in the barracks, listened to the soft murmurs of the other soldiers and the distant laughter of children in the streets. He thought of the baker Marcus and countless others like him, wondering if Rome's peace would truly reach them, if their fears could dissolve in the light of Augustus' careful governance. Sleep came slowly, but for the first time in years, it came with the whisper of hope. The city of Rome, though scarred and weary, had begun to breathe again, and in that fragile calm, Augustus' shadow stretched long across the stones, a silent promise of a new era, one that would be remembered, debated, and chronicled for centuries to come. The young legionary and the humble baker, though unaware of the full tapestry of history unfolding, felt its subtle influence, the steady pulse of a city slowly learning to trust, even as the past lingered in every shadow. And so the night passed, quiet but alive, carrying with it the echo of ambition, strategy, and hope. Augustus' rise was not sudden or violent. It was a patient tide, reshaping the shores of Rome, one careful decision at a time. The city, tired and weary, slept beneath the stars, cradled in the promise of stability that this one man, guided by vision and cunning, sought to maintain. And in that quiet, fragile peace, the story of Rome's journey from turmoil to order began, marking the first chapter of a saga that would stretch over centuries. Through triumphs and trials, and ultimately to its own inevitable decline, the sun rose slowly over Rome, painting the city in hues of gold and amber. The once chaotic streets now moved with a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar, a cadence of calm and order. Augustus had worked quietly, patiently, reshaping the city's pulse. Soldiers marched with purpose, merchants displayed their goods without fear, and citizens walked the streets with cautious confidence, sensing a new era dawning. This was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a concept so profound that its promise stretched beyond the city walls and into every corner of the vast empire. Lucius, a young legionary who had witnessed the chaos following Caesar's assassination, now strode through the streets with a steadier heart. The disciplined formations he had trained in months earlier were no longer merely exercises. They represented a new reality. Augustus had reorganized the legions, ensuring loyalty and efficiency. Soldiers were paid fairly, their families supported, and their commanders chosen not just for rank but for integrity and strategy. Lucius felt the shift deep within him, a sense of purpose that had been absent during the turbulent years of civil war. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Marcus the baker opened his shop with a renewed sense of hope. The supply of grain had stabilized thanks to Augustus's reforms, and trade routes were protected. Flour no longer disappeared mysteriously, nor did the threat of bandits haunt the roads as it once had. The citizens, cautious but relieved, moved with a subtle confidence that Marcus could almost taste in the air. Every loaf of bread he baked seemed to carry a fragment of this newfound stability. Augustus, seated in the marble halls of his palace, observed his city with quiet satisfaction. His reforms had touched every layer of Roman society. Roads were repaired, aqueducts maintained, and markets organized. Laws were codified to protect the weak, restrain corruption, and ensure fairness. Taxes were rationalized, collected efficiently, and invested in public works rather than lining the pockets of corrupt officials. Augustus knew that the survival of Rome depended not only on the sword but also on justice, order, and the trust of its citizens. Lucius was called to lead a patrol along the newly secured roads near the Tiber. Bandits were fewer now, and towns he passed showed signs of recovery, rebuilt walls, bustling marketplaces, and children playing freely in the streets. He thought of his comrades, who had once faced uncertainty daily, now marching with purpose and pride. Each step he took felt heavier with responsibility, but lighter with confidence. For the city had begun to heal under Augustus's careful guidance. In the Senate, Augustus's influence was evident yet subtle. He did not impose himself as a tyrant. Rather, he guided debates, proposed laws, and built alliances with those who might otherwise oppose him. Senators learned to respect the quiet authority he wielded. Discussions became less about personal power and more about the welfare of the city. This was the genius of Augustus, his ability to lead not through fear alone, but through structure, fairness, and the steady assurance of a vision realized over time. Back in the Forum, Marcus served bread to citizens who moved through the plaza with smiles rather than suspicion. Stories of Augustus' reforms traveled fast. Roads built, soldiers disciplined, grain supplies stabilized. People spoke of the peace with a reverence that was almost tangible. A peace hard-won and yet delicate, held together by the careful hands of one man. Marcus wondered how long it would last, aware that Rome had endured chaos before, but also sensing that something profound had begun. Lucius returned to the barracks at dusk, his boots echoing along the stone streets. He paused to watch the city bathe in the fading light, the silhouettes of temples and palaces casting long shadows. The Tiber reflected the sky's gentle hues, and he thought about how different this city felt compared to the Rome of a year ago. Augustus' reforms were not flashy or violent. They were methodical, almost invisible, yet their impact could be felt in every heartbeat of the city. In the evening, Marcus' family gathered around the table, eating bread that felt heavier with meaning than nourishment alone. His children laughed freely, the fear of sudden unrest replaced by curiosity and wonder. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to hope that Rome's future might be brighter, that his children might grow up in a city of stability, art, and culture rather than fear and violence. The streets grew quiet again under the starry sky. Soldiers returned to their posts, merchants secured their shops, and citizens whispered prayers of gratitude and hope. Augustus, in the solitude of his chambers, reviewed reports and plans, considering the delicate balance he had achieved. The Pax Romana was not merely a period of peace, it was a promise of order, a fragile trust between the ruler and the ruled, a vision of Rome that extended across mountains, seas, and deserts. Lucius lay on his cot, listening to the soft murmurs of his fellow soldiers. The night was still, yet alive with the subtle sounds of a city at peace, the distant toll of a bell, the low laughter of children, the soft murmur of the Tiber. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility ease slightly with the comfort of order. Augustus' careful hand had steadied the city, and for the first time in his young life, Lucius believed in the enduring promise of Rome. Marcus, resting in his modest home, listened to the wind rustle through the trees outside his window. He thought of the past years, the turmoil, the uncertainty, and now this new calm. Peace had returned, but it was not guaranteed. It was a fragile thread, maintained by diligence, wisdom, and the patient guidance of Augustus. The baker felt gratitude, tempered with a quiet understanding that the city's fate was intertwined with the actions of those who guided it, and so the night deepened, gentle and profound. The city slept, and with it, the lives of soldiers, merchants, and citizens flowed in harmony. The Pax Romana had begun, not with a bang, not with conquest, but with careful, deliberate steps toward justice, security, and stability. Augustus' vision stretched across the empire like the soft light of dawn, touching the hearts of those who walked the streets, carried weapons, baked bread, or whispered hopes for a safer, brighter tomorrow. Rome had found its rhythm again, subtle and enduring. And beneath the star-studded sky, the city breathed, alive with quiet resilience, carrying in its pulse the promise of a peace that, while delicate, would shape centuries of history. Soldiers like Lucius and citizens like Marcus slept with a newfound sense of security, their dreams infused with the gentle assurance of a city guided by wisdom, strategy, and the steady hand of Augustus. The city of Rome had adjusted to the calm that Augustus had carefully woven into its streets, yet beneath the surface, a new chapter was quietly beginning. The young men and women who had grown up under Augustus's guiding hand now looked toward the next generation of rulers. Lucius, the legionary who had witnessed Rome's transformation from chaos to order, now felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Augustus had secured the empire, but the question of who would follow him lingered like a shadow over the city. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, took the reins of power with measured caution. Unlike the masterful tactician who had come before, Tiberius was stern and reserved. Soldiers found him disciplined and unyielding. Citizens respected his intellect. Yet there was a distance in his demeanor that made people wary. Lucius noticed the difference immediately during his inspections. Orders were precise, punishments just, but the warmth that had subtly accompanied Augustus' leadership was replaced by rigid efficiency. Rome functioned, yes, but the heart of the city seemed quieter, more constrained. In the Marcus, Marcus, the baker, sensed a subtle tension. Tiberius' reforms ensured the city remained stable, yet whispers of fear crept into daily conversation. "Have you heard of the trials?" people asked in hushed tones. Accusations, often exaggerated or false, had begun to circulate. Citizens worried for their neighbors, and even Marcus found himself double-checking the bread deliveries. Mindful of any hint of disruption, life went on, but the shadow of suspicion had entered Rome's streets. Time passed, and the city's rhythm was shaken further by Caligula, whose rise brought both fascination and dread. Once beloved by the people for his charm as a child, the young emperor quickly became unpredictable. Soldiers and citizens alike observed his moods with caution. Moments of generosity were followed by acts of cruelty. Lucius had heard stories of extravagant feasts where laughter ended abruptly with executions whispered into dark corners. Marcus kept his family close, teaching his children to watch the world carefully, to measure words and gestures, for even a casual remark might draw unwelcome attention. Then came Claudius, an unlikely ruler in the eyes of many. A scholar at heart, physically awkward and underestimated, he surprised the city with his intellect and careful administration. Roads were repaired, aqueducts maintained, and legal reforms introduced. Lucius felt a renewed sense of purpose as soldiers followed new protocols. Commands given with clarity and reason rather than fear. Citizens like Marcus felt hope stir again, cautiously, as Claudius worked to maintain the fragile balance between power and fairness. Yet, even with reforms, the pulse of the city remained tense. The shadow of ambition, betrayal, and intrigue stretched through the corridors of the palace. Courtiers whispered secrets, letters carried coded messages, and alliances shifted like sand beneath the empire's feet. Lucius often overheard soldiers debating not just tactics, but loyalty, whose command to trust, whose promise to honor. Marcus, from his shop, noted the subtle changes in the marketplace. Merchants arrived with exotic goods from far-off provinces, yet conversations lingered on rumors of the palace rather than trade or harvest. And then Nero arrived, a name that would echo through the ages. At first, he seemed youthful, promising, and full of potential. Citizens cheered, soldiers saluted, and the city anticipated another era of prosperity. But soon, stories emerged of extravagance, obsession, and cruelty. Lucius, now a seasoned soldier, found himself patrolling streets filled with both awe and fear. Citizens whispered of fires, parties, and the emperor's unpredictable whims. Marcus, who had baked bread through the reigns of 4 emperors, now feared for the stability of his family and the city itself. The palace, a place of grandeur and secrecy, became the center of whispers. Every corridor held a story, betrayals plotted in candlelight, alliances forged over wine, and the delicate dance of survival among those who served too close to power. Lucius had learned to navigate both the battlefield and the subtle dangers of loyalty. Marcus had learned to measure hope with caution, to provide for his family without drawing attention, and to read the city's pulse through subtle signs. A hurried whisper, a shadow in the alley, the sudden absence of a neighbor. Despite the turbulence, life continued. Children played in the forum under watchful eyes. Merchants haggled and exchanged stories from distant provinces. And soldiers kept the city safe, or at least what semblance of safety it could hold. Lucius walked the streets at night, observing Rome bathed in moonlight, the temples and statues casting long shadows. He thought of the city's history, of the ambition that had built it, and the fragility that had always lingered beneath its surface. Marcus, closing his shop for the evening, reflected on the years he had seen: Augustus' calm wisdom, Tiberius' disciplined caution, Caligula's unpredictable terror, Claudius' scholarly reforms, and now Nero's extravagant and dangerous rule. The bread he baked fed more than bodies. It fed hope, resilience, and a quiet defiance in the face of uncertainty. Families ate, children laughed, and the city continued to breathe. Even as the pulse of power throbbed dangerously close to chaos, night descended, and with it, the city held its breath. Soldiers patrolled the quiet streets, watching for fires, disturbances, or signs of rebellion. Citizens listened to the wind whisper through the marble columns, imagining both past and future, weighing the promise of stability against the threat of tyranny. Lucius lay in his cot, reflecting on loyalty and survival, while Marcus tucked his children into bed, telling stories that emphasized courage, patience, and the fragile beauty of life in a city ruled by men whose fates could change in an instant. In the quiet hours, the city's heartbeat was both steady and uncertain. The Julio-Claudian dynasty had brought Rome into a new phase of history, one filled with accomplishments, learning, and culture, but also shadows of cruelty and fear. Augustus's careful legacy endured, yet each successive ruler added their own threads of tension and intrigue. Lucius, Marcus, and countless others lived within these threads, their lives intertwined with power and history, yet marked by resilience, courage, and the simple acts of survival. The moonlight shimmered on the Tiber, and the city seemed to exhale as one breathing in the calm, breathing out the unease. Rome had survived another generation of rulers, each leaving their mark, each shaping the future in ways both seen and unseen. Soldiers marched, citizens whispered, and the bread in Marcus' hands represented not just nourishment, but continuity, the enduring rhythm of life amid the grandeur and peril of empire. And so the night passed quietly over Rome, as it always did, carrying the lives of ordinary men and women, soldiers and merchants, through the pulse of a city governed by ambition, wisdom, fear, and hope. The Julio-Claudian dynasty had arrived, leaving behind stories that would echo for centuries. Stories of power, intrigue, and the delicate balance of life in an empire that had learned, again and again, that history was written not just by the victors, but by those who endured. The city of Rome had learned to breathe carefully, a fragile rhythm established under Augustus and maintained through the cautious reigns of Tiberius, Claudius, and others. But when Nero came to power, that rhythm became unpredictable, like a ship on waves it could barely ride. Soldiers, merchants, and citizens alike sensed the shift almost immediately. Lucius, now an experienced legionary, had patrolled Rome for years and had witnessed the steadiness of disciplined leadership. But Nero's presence brought a tension that was both visible and invisible. From the moment Nero ascended the throne, the city seemed to change. Palaces expanded extravagantly, gardens stretched endlessly, and the streets buzzed with a different energy, one of spectacle, ambition, and the faint scent of unease. Lucius observed the soldiers marching past the newly built monuments, their armor reflecting the sun, their eyes wary. Orders were no longer simply about defense or maintaining law. They were infused with unpredictability, a mix of whimsy and fear. One day, a parade might celebrate a trivial victory. The next, a citizen might vanish under unclear accusations. Marcus, the baker, noticed the subtle tremors in daily life. Grain prices fluctuated strangely, supplies arrived late, and whispers about the emperor's demands circulated through the forum. People spoke softly of lavish feasts, grand theaters, and the sudden disappearances of nobles. Marcus made sure his family was fed, his children safe, and his words measured. For even casual remarks could reach ears that carried influence. Yet life had to continue, bread still had to be baked, coins earned, and the rhythm of the city maintained, even amid fear. The fire that would later mark Nero's reign began as a faint smolder, almost imperceptible. In the narrow streets and crowded neighborhoods, smoke curled through the windows and along the stone pavements. Citizens shouted, water buckets were passed, and soldiers rushed to contain the flames. Lucius joined his cohort, feeling the heat and the fear, watching as families fled their homes, carrying children and possessions through the chaos. Yet even in this disaster, Nero's presence loomed. A figure both distant and central, directing relief with a flourish but often absent when practical help was needed. Rumors grew. Some whispered that the fire had been intentional, a performance for the emperor's amusement, though the truth was impossible to know. The city's pulse quickened with uncertainty. Soldiers like Lucius had to balance duty and caution, guarding the streets against looters while aiding citizens in distress. Marcus, standing among neighbors, handed out bread and comfort. Witnessing the fragility of a city whose foundations had been strong yet were now tested in the crucible of fear and spectacle. Nero's fascination with art and theater added another layer to daily life. The emperor performed in the amphitheater, sang, and played instruments while Rome watched. Soldiers were drafted into ceremonial roles, citizens invited or coerced to attend performances. And the line between governance and entertainment blurred. Lucius found himself both awed and concerned. The spectacle detracted from the practical needs of the city. Marcus, meanwhile, worried for his children, ensuring they understood caution and discretion in a city where appearances mattered as much as survival. Yet life continued amid the chaos. Merchants sold food and textiles. Soldiers patrolled the rebuilt streets, and families tried to maintain routines. The Tiber flowed steadily, indifferent to emperor's whims, while temples cast long shadows over neighborhoods. Marcus often paused in the evening to watch the moonlight shimmer across the water, imagining stability returning even if only temporarily. Lucius, resting after long patrols, felt the weight of duty heavy on his shoulders, but took comfort in the small acts of protection he could provide. Political intrigues simmered behind closed doors. Senators whispered of plots, alliances shifted with every rumor, and the corridors of the palace were filled with uncertainty. Loyalty was tested constantly, and even trusted friends might harbor secret agendas. Lucius learned to read subtle gestures, coded messages, and the unspoken intentions of those around him. Marcus, in quieter ways, taught his children to notice the unspoken, inhuman behavior, to measure words carefully, and to value prudence over impulsiveness. Despite fear and uncertainty, the city retained moments of beauty. Gardens bloomed, fountains glimmered in the sunlight, and the theaters echoed with music and laughter, however temporary or cautious. Citizens found small joys, children's laughter, shared meals, stories told under the soft glow of oil lamps. Life endured, resilient even under the pressure of an emperor whose whims could shift the city's mood from celebration to despair. Lucius, walking the streets at night, observed Rome's lights reflected on the cobblestones, flickering shadows dancing along walls. He thought of past leaders, of Augustus' careful guidance, Tiberius' stern order, and Claudius' scholarly reforms. Nero's reign was different, predictable, artistic, and dangerous. Yet the city adapted, as it always had. Soldiers found ways to maintain order, citizens found ways to protect their families, and individuals like Marcus found ways to nurture hope, however fragile it might be. As the night deepened, the fire's memory lingered in the minds of all Romans. Smoke had cleared, flames had been extinguished, but the fear, the uncertainty, the understanding that life could change in an instant, these remained. Lucius patrolled silently, the city asleep around him, yet alive with a tension that was both invisible and palpable. Marcus tucked his children into bed, whispering calm stories, teaching them that even amid turmoil, life persisted, and courage found its place in small acts of care, observation, and survival. Nero's shadow stretched across Rome like the moon's reflection on the Tiber, beautiful, elusive, and capable of both awe and terror. The city, ever resilient, absorbed the pressures of his rule, adapting quietly, breathing carefully, and finding its rhythm in the subtle spaces between spectacle and chaos. Lucius and Marcus, soldiers and citizens, became living witnesses to the emperor's reign, their experiences threaded with resilience, fear, and a quiet determination to endure. By the early hours, the city settled once more into a fragile calm. Fires were remembered, rumors whispered, and lessons learned. Augustus' vision of stability seemed both distant and fragile under Nero's shadow, yet the foundation of Rome's resilience persisted. Lucius lay on his cot, reflecting on duty and survival, while Marcus, closing his shop, found peace in the routine of bread, family, and quiet observation. And as the first light of dawn touched the marble columns and cobblestone streets, Rome's pulse continued steady in moments, uncertain in others, yet undeniably alive. Under Nero, the city had endured fire, fear, and whimsy. Under Nero, the citizens had adapted, survived, and maintained a rhythm of life that even emperors could not fully control. In the quiet spaces of night, amidst shadows and flickering torchlight, the story of Rome's resilience continued, a testament to the strength of ordinary lives amid extraordinary rule. The city of Rome had never felt so uncertain. The calm that had endured through Augustus's reign, and even the turbulence of Nero's time, now shattered like thin glass. News spread quickly through the streets, alleys, and marketplaces. Nero was dead. The emperor whose whims had guided Rome's fate, whose fires and music had captivated and terrified the city, was gone. Yet the absence of one ruler did not promise peace. Instead, it ushered in a year of chaos, one that would later be remembered as the Year of the Four Emperors. Lucius, seasoned by years of service in the legions, felt the weight of uncertainty more keenly than ever. Soldiers moved with alertness, not knowing which banner they would march under or which commander would demand loyalty tomorrow. Four names dominated the city: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Each promised stability, each carried ambition, and each threatened the delicate threads that held Rome together. Lucius understood that loyalty was not merely a matter of duty, now it was a matter of survival. Marcus, the baker, watched the city from the steps of his shop, noticing the tension etched in every face. Markets were quieter, citizens whispered cautiously, and even children played less freely. The streets, usually alive with chatter and commerce, moved with a strange stillness, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Every messenger, every rumor, every proclamation carried potential danger. Marcus thought about his family, about the bread he baked, and about the fragile thread of life that persisted amid political turbulence. Galba was the first to claim power, a veteran senator whose reputation for discipline and integrity preceded him. His entry into Rome was solemn, his proclamations cautious. Lucius and his fellow soldiers inspected the gates, uncertain of the new orders, while citizens tentatively hoped that stability might return. Yet Galba's rigid style, his unwillingness to reward loyalty generously, began to sow discontent among those who expected favor or recognition for past service. Then came Otho, ambitious and charismatic, who seized power with rapid decisiveness. Streets once quiet echoed with celebration, quickly replaced by fear. Soldiers were divided. Some pledged allegiance to Otho, others to Galba's memory. Lucius patrolled, balancing duty with the instinct to survive, aware that a single mistake or misalignment could cost him his life. Marcus noticed the sudden influx of couriers, proclamations, and guards enforcing loyalty oaths in the forum, the marketplace. Once predictable, now shifted with each new declaration of power. Vitellius from the north moved swiftly with his legions, adding to the confusion. Citizens whispered of battles approaching, armies marching, and families fleeing to safer neighborhoods. Lucius' cohort prepared for engagement, yet uncertainty dominated the day. Who would emerge victorious? Who would command Rome's heart, streets, and laws? Marcus baked bread in anticipation of shortages, preparing to assist neighbors who might flee or suffer from the turmoil. Vespasian emerged last, a general whose strategy, patience, and leadership would eventually stabilize the empire. But at the time, his rise was only a rumor, a promise not yet fulfilled. Lucius observed the shifting loyalties of soldiers, the fragile alliances, and the careful calculations of commanders who understood that Rome's survival depended on both cunning and chance. Marcus watched families huddle together, neighbors exchange warnings, and citizens adjust their routines to navigate the uncertainty. Life, though disrupted, endured. The city witnessed battles, proclamations, and betrayals in quick succession. Soldiers clashed not just on distant fields, but in allegiances, rumors, and whispered conversations. Citizens adapted, learning to measure every word, observe every gesture, and navigate a world where power could shift overnight. Lucius patrolled through shadows and torchlight, understanding that vigilance, courage, and discipline were the only constants in a city swept by political storms. Amid the chaos, everyday life persisted. Children still laughed in hidden courtyards, merchants sold essentials with wary smiles, and neighbors quietly shared food or news. Marcus, though anxious, maintained a semblance of routine, ensuring that his family and neighbors had sustenance. The human rhythm of Rome continued, despite the turbulence in leadership, a testament to resilience that had carried the city through centuries of change. The transitions of power were sudden, often violent, yet Rome's streets, temples, and homes absorbed each shock. Lucius thought of Augustus, of the careful stability he had built, and realized how fragile that balance truly was. Marcus, baking at dusk, understood that survival depended on adaptation, not hope alone. Each new emperor brought a wave of promise, fear, or disruption, yet ordinary citizens continued to navigate daily life, finding courage in small acts of resilience. By the end of the year, Vespasian's rise marked a turning point. The city, exhausted by rapid change, began to settle under his disciplined leadership. Soldiers received clear commands, governance returned to structured procedures, and citizens could, once more, feel the faint pulse of stability. Lucius, weary but steadfast, understood that the city had survived not because rulers were benevolent, but because ordinary Romans endured, adapted, and preserved the continuity of life. Marcus, standing in his shop, saw neighbors cautiously resuming routines, children returning to play, and the marketplace gradually regaining its rhythm. Night fell over Rome, quieter now than it had for months. The moonlight reflected off the Tiber, as if washing away the turmoil, hinting at a fragile calm. Lucius rested, contemplating the resilience required to endure such upheaval, while Marcus tucked his children into bed, whispering stories that emphasized courage, patience, and the subtle triumphs of everyday life. Rome had endured a year of uncertainty unlike any before, a year defined by ambition, conflict, and shifting allegiances. Yet the city persisted, its heartbeat steady beneath the chaos. Its citizens resilient, its soldiers disciplined, and its markets cautiously alive. The year of the 4 emperors had tested every layer of Roman society, revealing both fragility and strength, fear and courage, disorder and adaptation. And so, beneath the starry sky, Rome breathed again. The city that had witnessed the death of Nero, the rapid succession of rulers, and battles fought both in streets and hearts, settled into a tentative rhythm. Life endured in kitchens, barracks, temples, and homes. The year of the 4 emperors had passed, leaving lessons written not on scrolls or marble, but in the resilience of soldiers, the vigilance of citizens, and the quiet determination of those who survived to see another dawn. Rome was weary yet alive. The chaos of the year of the 4 emperors had passed, leaving scars on the streets, whispers in the forum, and caution in the hearts of citizens. Lucius, the veteran legionary, walked along the cobblestones with a keen awareness of the changes around him. Orders were now clear, loyalties more structured, and the sense of fear that had dominated Nero's reign and the turmoil of multiple emperors had begun to fade. Vespasian had emerged victorious, bringing with him the promise of a new era, the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian was not a man of theatrics. He did not charm the city with flamboyant displays or extravagant spectacles. Instead, he moved with deliberate purpose, restoring the foundations of governance, law, and military order. Soldiers responded to his disciplined command with renewed respect, not fear. Lucius felt a sense of steadiness returning to his daily life. No longer did he worry which general would command the legions tomorrow, or whose allegiance might be tested. The Tiber flowed, as it had for centuries, seemingly unaffected by the human ambitions that had threatened to drown the city. In the marketplaces, Marcus noticed a cautious optimism. Supplies stabilized, merchants felt a measure of safety, and grain arrived on schedule. Families moved with measured confidence through the streets, and conversations shifted from rumors of palace intrigue to practical matters: trade, repairs, and preparation for the coming seasons. The city, bruised but resilient, seemed ready to rebuild not only its buildings but its collective spirit. Vespasian focused on the reconstruction of Rome itself. Public works projects flourished, roads were repaired, aqueducts maintained, and infrastructure strengthened. Soldiers like Lucius found themselves involved in projects that combined duty with civic improvement. Bridges were reinforced, temples restored, and the forum cleared of debris that had accumulated during the recent years of unrest. Each task carried a sense of purpose beyond survival or commitment to a city that had endured centuries of ambition, war, and fire. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his work in the bakery, observing the subtle effects of Vespasian's governance. Taxes were collected more fairly, civic duties organized efficiently, and the economy stabilized. Citizens whispered approval cautiously, their trust returning gradually. Marcus felt the relief in the rhythm of his work. Bread baked and sold without fear of sudden upheaval. Customers paying with confidence, and neighbors sharing stories rather than warnings. Life, after so many years of uncertainty, began to reclaim its gentle flow. Vespasian's rule was marked by pragmatic wisdom. He strengthened the army, ensuring loyalty and discipline, but avoided the excesses that had marked Nero's reign. Lucius observed the legions training with precision, officers executing commands with clarity, and soldiers understanding their roles not just in war, but in maintaining stability across the empire. Rome's borders, previously stretched thin by decades of neglect and upheaval, were reinforced. Provinces sent reports and tributes more reliably, contributing to the wealth and security of the city. The Flavian dynasty also fostered cultural and civic revival. The Colosseum, or the Flavian amphitheater, began to rise as a symbol of both entertainment and engineering prowess. Citizens like Marcus felt pride in the rebuilding of public spaces, even as soldiers like Lucius recognized the discipline required to complete such monumental projects. Festivals, games, and public ceremonies returned, bringing temporary relief and shared joy to a city long haunted by fear. Yet, stability required vigilance. Vespasian's careful administration reminded everyone that peace was not granted. It was maintained through duty, foresight, and resilience. Lucius patrolled the streets with an awareness that the foundations of trust and order were fragile, maintained by the vigilance of both rulers and citizens. Marcus, meanwhile, taught his children that care, observation, and cautious optimism were essential in a city whose history had been shaped by ambition, rebellion, and resilience. At night, the city of Rome settled into a measured calm. Soldiers returned to their barracks, citizens closed shops and homes, and the Forum echoed with the quiet footsteps of late wanderers. Lucius watched the torchlight flicker across statues and temples, considering how much had changed in the past decades. He reflected on the stability that Vespasian brought, understanding that the city's heartbeat had become steady not through grand gestures, but through careful administration, discipline, and the restoration of civic order. Marcus, resting after a long day of kneading and baking, observed his neighbors preparing meals, children learning, and families sharing stories. The bread he provided nourished more than hunger. It symbolized continuity, resilience, and the quiet triumph of life persisting through chaos. The Flavian dynasty, with its disciplined rule and emphasis on restoration, had created conditions where ordinary Romans could breathe, work, and dream without the constant shadow of fear. Lucius patrolled the city under the silver glow of the moon, noting the repaired streets, the calm guards, and the peaceful domestic rhythms. Rome, once again, had begun to function not merely as a city of survival, but as a home for its people. Citizens moved with confidence, soldiers executed duties with clarity, and rulers maintained authority without terror. The Flavian dynasty, through pragmatism and foresight, had re-established the foundations of power while respecting the pulse of everyday life. By the early hours, the city exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. Fires no longer raged unchecked, whispers of rebellion had diminished, and a cautious optimism settled over the forum and marketplaces. Lucius, Marcus, and countless others understood that Rome's endurance depended not just on emperors, but on the ordinary acts of citizens and soldiers whose courage, patience, and resilience ensured the survival and revival of the city. Rome had endured centuries of ambition, rebellion, tyranny, and chaos, yet under the Flavian dynasty, its heartbeat regained a steady rhythm. Soldiers marched with purpose, citizens moved with careful hope, and life continued, resilient and enduring. Vespasian's rule marked a turning point, a period where stability, reconstruction, and cautious optimism allowed the city to heal, and where the foundations laid by ordinary Romans would support the empire for decades to come. And as the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, the Tiber mirrored the gentle glow of the sun. Rome breathed steadily once more, its streets alive with the rhythm of work, conversation, and quiet determination. The Flavian dynasty had restored not only order, but confidence, a reminder that even after turmoil, careful leadership and the resilience of citizens could sustain a city destined for greatness. Rome had finally embraced a period of quiet confidence. The turbulence of the Julio-Claudian line, Nero's whims, and the year of the 4 emperors had gradually faded into memory. Lucius, now a seasoned soldier, walked the streets with a steadiness he had not known in decades. Soldiers trained with discipline, citizens traded with ease, and the city's heartbeat reflected an unusual sense of prosperity. This was the era that historians would call the rule of the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Adrian, Antoninus, Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, time of relative peace, order, and cultural flourishing. Nerva, the first of the line, ruled with careful prudence. He brought balance to a city still recovering from decades of upheaval. Lucius observed the legions restructured, loyalty rewarded through measured incentives rather than fear. Marcus, the baker, noticed taxes being fairly administered, markets stabilized, and citizens walking the forum without hesitation. The city, for the first time in decades, moved with confidence that the ruler's hand guided with wisdom rather than tyranny. Trajan followed, expanding the empire to its greatest territorial reach. Soldiers under Lucius' command marched confidently to distant provinces, securing borders and integrating new territories. Citizens, though far from the front lines, felt a quiet pride in Rome's strength. Trade flourished with the addition of new regions. Exotic goods, spices, and silks filled the markets. Marcus watched shipments arrive, merchants haggling energetically, and the city's energy pulse with a subtle but palpable vitality. Hadrian, the next emperor, focused on consolidation rather than expansion. He traveled extensively, inspecting provinces, strengthening fortifications, and commissioning projects like Hadrian's Wall. Lucius patrolled both familiar streets and distant borders, witnessing the discipline and foresight of a leader who valued security and order. Citizens like Marcus marveled at the public works, fountains, temples, and roads that connected the empire, feeling a renewed sense of civic pride and belonging. Antoninus' pious reign brought exceptional internal stability. Rome enjoyed economic growth, administrative reforms, and cultural advancement. Soldiers like Lucius benefited from clear commands, fair leadership, and predictable assignments. Citizens experienced justice more reliably, markets thrived, and families like Marcus could plan for the future with confidence. Children played in the forum, merchants conducted trade openly, and the city's pulse resonated with security and productivity. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, blended military duty with stoic wisdom. Lucius observed campaigns that protected the empire without unnecessary cruelty, while Marcus watched civic life flourish under a ruler whose intellect guided policy as much as force. Stoic teachings filtered through the administration, influencing both soldiers and citizens to approach life with resilience, discipline, and reason. Markets remained lively, families prospered, and the city streets reflected a harmony of ambition, order, and culture rarely seen before. Throughout this era, Rome became not just a city of survival, but a hub of learning, art, and infrastructure. Roads stretched further, aqueducts supplied water reliably, and public spaces flourished. Soldiers trained rigorously yet fairly, while citizens celebrated festivals, games, and cultural events with enthusiasm and security. Marcus noted that the rhythms of daily life had transformed. The city moved with confidence and trust in governance rather than fear of tyranny. Yet even in peace, vigilance persisted. Lucius remained attentive during patrols, aware that stability required effort as much as luck. Citizens quietly observed each other, negotiating social and commercial interactions with the wisdom gained from decades of previous upheavals. Marcus taught his children lessons of prudence, justice, and careful optimism, reinforcing the subtle resilience that had carried Rome through so many crises. Rome's heartbeat under the 5 good emperors was steady yet vibrant. Soldiers marched, citizens traded, and public life flourished with an almost tangible rhythm. Lucius reflected on how different the city felt compared to the chaos of Nero or the turbulence of multiple claimants to power. Marcus, kneading dough in the quiet morning light, felt the continuity of life, the strength of tradition, and the profound reassurance that governance could indeed serve the people with fairness and wisdom. As night fell, the city's temples glowed softly in the moonlight. Soldiers returned to barracks, merchants closed their shops, and families settled into homes with a newfound sense of security. Lucius patrolled the streets, noting the calm yet vigilant eyes of his comrades. Marcus tucked his children into bed, whispering stories that highlighted courage, justice, and the quiet beauty of everyday life under wise leadership. Rome, resilient and enduring, had reached a pinnacle of governance, culture, and security. The 5 good emperors had restored not only order but faith in the city's institutions. Citizens felt the value of law, soldiers the honor of disciplined service, and merchants the opportunities of a thriving economy. Ordinary life had returned with dignity, and the pulse of the city beat in harmony with the aspirations of its people. In the early hours of dawn, the Tiber shimmered in the soft light. Rome breathed steadily, alive with the promise of stability, prosperity, and cultural flourishing. Lucius, Marcus, and countless others embodied the resilience of a city whose strength lay not only in its rulers, but in the enduring spirit of its citizens. The era of the 5 good emperors had shown that through wise governance, disciplined service, and the perseverance of ordinary Romans, the empire could thrive, enduring centuries of history yet to unfold. And so, Rome moved forward, guided by reason, courage, and careful stewardship, a city whose heartbeat resonated with hope, strength, and the quiet confidence of an empire at peace for a time. Rome had known prosperity and stability under the 5 good emperors, yet history rarely remained so gentle. The 3rd century arrived, and with it, uncertainty, conflict, and profound challenges that would test the empire as never before. Lucius, the seasoned legionary who had walked Rome's streets through decades of peace and war, felt the first tremors of instability. Soldiers whispered of assassinations, political intrigue, and the sudden rise of new emperors, each claiming the throne with both ambition and danger. The streets of Rome were alive with both commerce and tension. Marcus, the baker, observed neighbors speaking cautiously, merchants haggling with a new wariness, and children playing in alleys that were quieter than before. Rumors spread quickly: barbarian invasions from the north, Persians pressing from the east, and generals plotting against emperors. Rome's stability, hard won over decades, now teetered on a knife's edge. Emperors came and went with dizzying speed. Lucius patrolled the streets, noting the swift changes in loyalty among soldiers. Each commander carried new promises, new commands, and sometimes new brutality. Ordinary citizens like Marcus adapted to the uncertainty, storing food, securing homes, and teaching their children to recognize the dangers hidden in whispers and shadows. Life was a constant balance between survival and hope. Economic hardship intensified. Inflation spread as coins lost value. Grain shipments became unpredictable, and taxes increased to fund endless campaigns. Marcus found himself working longer hours to meet the needs of both his family and neighbors. Soldiers like Lucius faced delayed pay, stretched supplies, and relentless campaigns that tested both endurance and loyalty. The empire's wealth, once flowing steadily through Rome, now fluctuated with every border skirmish and political upheaval. Barbarian incursions reached the Rhine and Danube, shaking the frontier provinces. Lucius marched to defend cities and forts, witnessing the chaos of battle and the fear of local populations. Villages burned, merchants fled, and citizens sought refuge behind walls. Marcus's relatives in the provinces wrote letters of despair, describing raids and destruction that reminded Romans in the capital that the empire's reach was vast, but its hold increasingly fragile. Political instability fed more chaos. Soldiers, who once marched under disciplined banners, now often proclaimed emperors themselves. Lucius saw comrades elevate generals to power with little ceremony, only to witness their rapid downfall. Rome's leadership became a revolving door, with ambition and assassination leaving citizens uncertain whom to trust. Marcus relied on community bonds to maintain some semblance of normal life. Neighbors shared news, supplies, and advice on survival in unpredictable times. Amid the crisis, daily life persisted, though fraught with vigilance. Markets remained open, though merchants negotiated cautiously. Children learned to navigate streets filled with both opportunity and danger. Soldiers like Lucius continued patrols, maintaining order where possible. And citizens like Marcus adapted routines to preserve food, safety, and hope. Survival was not guaranteed. Resilience became a measure of both skill and courage. Lucius reflected on the lessons of prior decades. Stability required more than strong rulers. It required disciplined citizens, loyal soldiers, and communities capable of withstanding upheaval. Marcus, kneading dough in the early morning light, understood that survival depended on vigilance, prudent planning, and mutual support. Rome was not merely an empire of emperors. It was sustained by the determination of ordinary people navigating extraordinary times. The empire's borders shifted constantly. Provinces declared independence or sought new alliances. Lucius participated in campaigns to restore control, encountering both victory and defeat. Moments of hope shadowed by the reality of ongoing crises. Marcus received letters describing both heroic stands and devastating losses. The fabric of the empire, stretched thin, was tested repeatedly, revealing both resilience and fragility. Yet, even in turmoil, the city of Rome maintained rhythms of life. Temples remained centers of worship. Citizens celebrated festivals cautiously, and the Tiber flowed steadily through the heart of the capital. Lucius, patrolling at night, observed families moving quietly, merchants securing shops, and citizens balancing fear with perseverance. Marcus whispered lessons of courage and prudence to his children, teaching them to navigate a world where leadership could change overnight and survival depended on foresight and adaptability. Amid the chaos of war, politics, and economic strain, culture and learning persisted. Scholars continued to write, artists continued to create, and knowledge was preserved in libraries and temples. The city's heartbeat, though irregular, reflected a determination to endure. Soldiers, merchants, and citizens adapted, preserving the structures of society even as emperors rose and fell like shadows across the empire. Rome's experience during the crisis of the 3rd century illustrated the precarious balance between power, loyalty, and daily life. Lucius's vigilance, Marcus' resilience, and the determination of countless ordinary Romans ensured that the empire, though battered, persisted. The lessons of this era were harsh but enduring. Leadership alone could not secure Rome's survival. The combined strength, prudence, and courage of its people were equally vital. As night fell over the Tiber, Rome rested uneasily. Soldiers patrolled the streets, citizens secured homes, and families huddled together. Lucius, contemplating the shifting empires, understood that this was a test not only of emperors, but of the enduring spirit of the city itself. Marcus, watching the moonlight glint on the river, found reassurance in community, family, and the quiet acts that allowed life to persist amid uncertainty. The 3rd century's crisis would leave scars and lessons. Rome's pulse was uneven, challenged by internal strife and external threats, yet resilient. Lucius, Marcus, and countless others bore witness to the fragility and strength of the empire. In these dark decades, the city's heartbeat, though tested, continued, sustained by the courage, adaptability, and perseverance of ordinary Romans, ensuring that Rome, despite its trials, endured and would rise again. Rome, having endured the tumultuous 3rd century, found itself at a crossroads. Political upheaval, economic instability, and repeated invasions had weakened the empire. Lucius, the experienced legionary, sensed a shift as a new ruler emerged: Diocletian. Unlike previous emperors, Diocletian approached leadership not as a lone figure of authority, but as an architect of structure, organization, and strategic foresight. The city of Rome, though no longer the sole center of imperial administration, remained vibrant. Marcus, the baker, observed changes in governance: clearer taxation systems, stricter regulations, and a heightened emphasis on order. Soldiers received new codes of conduct, pay schedules were standardized, and provincial governors were monitored to ensure accountability. Life in Rome felt simultaneously familiar and carefully restructured. Diocletian's introduction of the tetrarchia system of 4 emperors ruling different regions was revolutionary. Lucius learned that power was no longer centralized in a single, often unpredictable ruler. 2 senior emperors, the Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, the Caesars, now shared authority. This division aimed to stabilize succession, defend borders efficiently, and reduce the constant threat of usurpation. Soldiers found clarity in chain of command, and citizens observed leadership decisions made with deliberation rather than impulse. Marcus noticed how the tetrarchy influenced daily life. Taxes were levied more predictably. Infrastructure projects continued steadily, and soldiers maintained roads, aqueducts, and public works. Provinces received consistent governance, and local officials knew their responsibilities were scrutinized by multiple layers of authority. Rome, though no longer the singular political hub, benefited from organized administration and improved communication across the empire. Military life, for Lucius and his comrades, became more structured. Troops were stationed strategically along borders, particularly in regions vulnerable to barbarian incursions. Training regimens were standardized, and discipline was reinforced. Campaigns were carefully planned with logistical precision, ensuring that legions were supported and that civilian populations along the frontiers remained protected. The Tetrarchy allowed for coordinated defense, reducing the chaos that had plagued the 3rd century. Economic reforms accompanied political restructuring. Diocletian sought to stabilize the empire's finances, introducing price edicts and stricter currency regulation. Marcus experienced both challenges and relief. While some goods became subject to controlled prices, the predictability helped maintain stability in the marketplace. Citizens, though initially wary of restrictions, gradually adapted, understanding that survival and prosperity required cooperation with the new system. Social life in Rome shifted subtly. Festivals, public games, and ceremonies were preserved, yet citizens sensed a more disciplined, regulated environment. Lucius patrolled streets where order was visibly enforced, and Marcus ensured his family adhered to civic responsibilities, including tax obligations and public participation. Rome's vibrancy persisted, yet it was now intertwined with accountability, structure, and careful observation of the new imperial order. The Tetrarchy also redefined succession. Emperors adopted successors to prevent violent power struggles, a system designed to ensure continuity and minimize usurpation. Soldiers, governors, and citizens alike learned to navigate this framework, recognizing that loyalty to the empire now required both vigilance and adaptation. Lucius trained new recruits in the importance of hierarchy, while Marcus explained to his children the value of rules, civic duty, and resilience in a changing world. Diocletian's architectural and administrative projects left tangible marks on the empire. Roads, fortifications, and public buildings were strengthened, enhancing both security and quality of life. Soldiers maintained these projects as part of their service, while citizens, including Marcus, observed the long-term benefits: safer streets, reliable water supply, and a sense of civic pride that had been eroded during prior centuries of instability. Despite the reforms, challenges persisted. Barbarian pressure, natural disasters, and the vastness of the empire required constant attention. Lucius remained vigilant along the frontiers, understanding that order depended on both disciplined military service and cooperative civilian populations. Marcus adapted, storing supplies, managing his bakery efficiently, and teaching resilience to the next generation. Rome's endurance, it became clear, relied as much on ordinary people as on emperors' strategies. Night fell over the city. Soldiers returned to barracks, merchants secured shops, and families prepared for quiet evenings. Lucius reflected on how the Tetrarchy, with its innovative structure, had restored clarity and stability. Marcus, kneading dough by candlelight, recognized that the system provided a sense of predictability that allowed ordinary life to flourish even amid the empire's vast and complex structure. Rome, under Diocletian and the Tetrarchy, moved toward a new rhythm. Citizens walked the streets with cautious confidence. Soldiers executed orders with clarity, and governors managed provinces with accountability. Ordinary life persisted, resilient yet aware, balancing the grandeur of empire with the practicalities of daily existence. The empire had endured centuries of ambition, chaos, and conflict. Diocletian's reforms marked a turning point, a recognition that stability required foresight, structure, and cooperation across all levels of society. Lucius Marcos and countless others embodied the endurance of Rome, navigating the challenges of leadership, warfare, and civic life with resilience and determination. As the moon cast silver light over the Tiber, Rome rested, its heartbeat steady but alert. Citizens, soldiers, and families embraced the quiet victories of stability, adaptation, and survival. The Tetrarchy was more than a political system. It was a safeguard for the empire, ensuring that Rome could continue to thrive even amid the uncertainties of a vast and dynamic world. In the early hours of dawn, the city reflected the calm determination of its people. Lucius prepared for the day's patrols, Marcus for the morning's baking, and families quietly navigated streets that now balanced tradition with regulation. Rome had adapted once more, demonstrating that the endurance of an empire depended not solely on emperors, but on the collective courage, vigilance, and perseverance of all who called it home. And so, under the watchful eyes of Diocletian and his colleagues, the city breathed steadily, alive with the rhythm of order, discipline, and enduring life, a testament to the resilience of Rome and the ordinary people whose strength sustained its greatness. The city of Rome was waking from decades of turmoil, yet the memory of constant upheaval lingered in its streets. Lucius, a seasoned legionary, remembered the years when emperors rose and fell like shadows, when borders were unstable, and when ordinary citizens like Marcus lived with a constant edge of fear. Now, a new emperor, Diocletian, had arrived with a promise of order, foresight, and strategic reform. Rome itself remained bustling yet cautious. Markets opened with a rhythm that citizens could trust, merchants measured their goods carefully, and children played in the squares under the watchful eyes of their parents. Marcus, the baker, noted the subtle but unmistakable signs of change. Taxes now had regular schedules, grain shipments arrived more predictably, and civic authorities patrolled with discipline rather than arbitrary force. Life, though still attentive, carried a renewed sense of structure. Diocletian's most revolutionary idea was the Tetrarchy system, designed to distribute power among 4 emperors, to Signor Augusti and to Junior Caesars. Lucius observed how this division affected both soldiers and citizens. Orders became clearer, succession plans more transparent, and governance more regionalized. Soldiers trained and patrolled under a predictable chain of command, understanding exactly which authority they answered to. Citizens noticed the difference too. Governors enforced laws consistently, and disputes were resolved with oversight rather than whim. The reorganization was not merely political, it reached the daily rhythms of life. Marcus noticed that bakery supplies arrived reliably, roads were maintained, and public buildings underwent careful restoration. The Tetrarchy's emphasis on order allowed ordinary Romans to resume routines with a cautious optimism, balancing hope with vigilance. Families could plan for the future without fearing sudden uprisings or neglectful governors. Military life under Diocletian transformed dramatically. Lucius and his comrades were stationed strategically along threatened borders, particularly the Rhine and Danube. Campaigns were coordinated, supplies organized, and officers held accountable. Soldiers trained rigorously, yet efficiently, understanding that their role extended beyond combat to the maintenance of infrastructure and civic order. The tetrarchy structure made it possible to respond rapidly to barbarian incursions and internal disturbances alike. The decision to establish a new capital in Byzantium, soon to be called Constantinople, marked a pivotal shift in Rome's geography and administration. Lucius accompanied legions tasked with fortifying the city, constructing roads, walls, and essential structures to prepare the eastern capital for the future. Marcus, hearing tales from traders and citizens, marveled at the scale of planning, the ambition to create a thriving urban center, and the promise it held for commerce and daily life. In Constantinople, citizens from across the empire began to settle, bringing diverse customs, crafts, and knowledge. Markets opened with vibrant energy, soldiers maintained security, and public works reflected both Roman engineering prowess and the ambitions of a new era. Lucius recognized the disciplined effort required to build a city that could rival Rome itself, while Marcus imagined how future generations would live, work, and flourish under Constantine's vision. Political and religious reforms intertwined. Constantine's issuance of the Edict of Milan granted freedom of worship, easing tensions and fostering loyalty among citizens. Marcus observed neighbors openly practicing Christianity, while soldiers like Lucius witnessed diverse communities cooperating to maintain order and defend the empire's frontiers. The city itself became a symbol of unity, resilience, and strategic foresight. Daily life adapted to the transformation. Citizens moved through streets where old temples coexisted with emerging churches. Merchants traded goods from distant provinces, and soldiers enforced laws with clarity and fairness. Marcus taught his children the value of adaptation, observation, and resilience, emphasizing that survival and prosperity often required navigating change with wisdom and care. Constantine's vision extended beyond administration. The construction of aqueducts, roads, and fortifications in Constantinople reflected the practical necessities of empire while inspiring awe. Lucius supervised fortifications along the new capital's walls, understanding that military strength underpinned political stability. Marcus marveled at the scale of urban planning, appreciating how strategic foresight could shape not only cities, but the lives of countless citizens. The shift eastward did not erase Rome's significance. The city remained a cultural and symbolic heart of the empire, its streets alive with commerce, ritual, and the rhythm of daily life. Soldiers, merchants, and citizens adapted to dual centers of power, learning to navigate political authority, religious transformation, and economic opportunity. Lucius patrolled with diligence, while Marcus managed his bakery, ensuring that life continued amid change. As night fell, Rome reflected both continuity and transformation. Citizens rested with cautious optimism, soldiers maintained vigilance, and families like Marcus embraced the routines that sustained daily life. Lucius, contemplating the vast changes under Constantine, understood that the empire's endurance depended not solely on military or administrative strategy, but on the resilience, adaptability, and determination of ordinary people. The establishment of Constantinople signaled a new chapter in the Roman Empire. The city promised security, strategic advantage, and a center for cultural and religious flourishing. Soldiers, citizens and merchants alike felt the impact of this monumental shift, balancing the familiar rhythms of Rome with the emerging vitality of the Eastern capital. Marcus taught his children to observe, adapt, and thrive, understanding that ordinary lives were intertwined with the ambitions of emperors and the trajectory of history. In the early hours of dawn, Constantinople shimmered by the Bosphorus, while Rome rested under the weight of tradition and memory. Lucius prepared for his morning patrols, Marcus for the day's bread, and families quietly moved through streets that reflected both continuity and transformation. The empire had endured centuries of upheaval, reform, and resilience. Now, under Constantine, it embraced a vision that blended strategy, faith, and foresight. Rome and its new eastern capital breathed with a steady rhythm, alive with possibility, discipline, and enduring life. Soldiers, citizens, and families continued daily tasks with care and determination, sustaining the empire's heartbeat. Constantine's legacy, both practical and spiritual, promised stability and adaptation for generations to come, reminding all that the strength of Rome lay not solely in its rulers, but in the courage, wisdom, and perseverance of its people. And so, under Constantine's guidance, the empire entered a new era, one of strategic foresight, religious recognition, and urban transformation, a testament to the enduring resilience of Rome and the ordinary citizens whose lives shaped and were shaped by the unfolding story of an empire that refused to fade. Rome, once the unchallenged heart of an empire stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, now faced divisions that threatened its unity. Lucius, now an older soldier with decades of service behind him, sensed the growing fragility of the empire he had defended for so long. The East and West were increasingly distinct, not only politically but culturally, economically, and militarily. Marcus the baker observed these changes through the daily life of the city. Markets remained busy, yet whispers of insecurity traveled faster than grain shipments. Citizens discussed barbarian invasions, rising taxes, and political instability in hushed tones. Children played in alleys with laughter tinged by caution, understanding that their world was shifting in ways neither predictable nor entirely safe. Economic reforms complemented political and military strategies. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices sought to stabilize the economy, controlling inflation that had plagued Rome during the 3rd century. Marcus experienced these changes firsthand. While prices were controlled, the predictability helped maintain supply chains and prevented widespread panic. Citizens gradually adapted, realizing that cooperation with the system ensured survival and modest prosperity even amid constraints. Social life reflected the renewed discipline. Festivals, games, and public ceremonies continued, but with a sense of regulation and order. Lucius patrolled the streets during events, ensuring security and observing how citizens adhered to civic responsibilities. Marcus taught his children the values of prudence and respect for law, emphasizing that even in an empire of vast territories, small acts of responsibility sustained collective life. The Tetrarchy also addressed succession, one of Rome's perennial problems. Emperors adopted heirs and trained them carefully, preventing the chaos of unexpected power struggles. Soldiers, governors, and citizens learned to navigate this new framework, understanding that loyalty now required awareness, adaptability, and foresight. Lucius shared these lessons with younger recruits, while Marcus explained to his family how stability depended on both rulers and ordinary people observing their duties diligently. Infrastructure projects flourished. Roads were repaired, fortifications strengthened, and public buildings restored. Soldiers participated in these works, blending military duty with civic contribution. Citizens like Marcus saw tangible benefits: safer streets, reliable water supply, and public spaces that reinforced the sense of order. Rome's grandeur persisted, yet now intertwined with the practicalities of governance and the resilience of daily life. Challenges, however, remained. Barbarian pressures, internal unrest, and the sheer scale of the empire demanded constant attention. Lucius remained vigilant along the frontiers, balancing military duties with the understanding that Rome's endurance depended equally on civilian resilience. Marcus adapted daily life, managing his bakery efficiently, storing food, and teaching his children to remain alert yet hopeful. Survival was an exercise in foresight, adaptation, and community solidarity. Night in Rome carried both calm and awareness. Soldiers returned to barracks, families secured homes, and the city exhaled after a day of regulated life. Lucius reflected on how the Tetrarchy, with its checks and balances, restored a sense of predictability. Marcus, kneading dough in the candlelight, recognized that these reforms allowed ordinary life to regain dignity and continuity even as the empire's vast machinery operated in the background. Rome's rhythm under the Tetrarchy became a delicate balance of governance, civic life, and military preparedness. Citizens walked the streets with cautious confidence, soldiers executed orders with clarity, and governors managed provinces with accountability. Ordinary life thrived not because the empire was free of challenges, but because structure, foresight, and the vigilance of both rulers and people created an environment where resilience could flourish. By dawn, the city shimmered under the early light. Lucius prepared for patrols, Marcus for the morning's bread, and families moved quietly through streets that reflected both tradition and disciplined governance. Rome had adapted once again, demonstrating that enduring an empire required more than the wisdom of emperors. It required the courage, prudence, and perseverance of its citizens. Under Diocletian and the Tetrarchy, Rome breathed steadily. Soldiers, citizens, and officials all contributed to a stable rhythm, where governance was predictable, life was sustainable, and survival depended on collective responsibility. The empire had endured centuries of ambition, chaos, and conflict, and now its future relied on innovation, structure, and the enduring resilience of those who lived within its walls. And so, Rome rested under the careful eyes of 4 rulers, alive with order, discipline, and life, a testament to the strength of its people and the enduring spirit of an empire that had learned through trial and perseverance. The art of surviving and thriving in a turbulent world. Rome had survived centuries of chaos, reform, and resilience. Yet the horizon of the empire now shifted eastward. Lucius, an aging legionary whose service had spanned decades, sensed the winds of transformation as Constantine rose to power. The empire stretched across continents and cultures, required vision and strategy, and Constantine would become a figure whose decisions reshaped not only Rome but the spiritual and political landscape of the empire itself. In the heart of the city, Marcus the baker noted subtle yet profound changes. Citizens whispered about the emperor's proclamations. Merchants discussed new trade routes, and children played under the shadow of temples and forums that reflected both tradition and emerging change. The streets, though familiar, carried a tension born from anticipation. Rome was entering a new era. Constantine's military genius secured his position. Lucius witnessed campaigns that consolidated power across western and eastern provinces, unifying regions that had long been divided by ambition, rebellion, and distance. Soldiers marched with renewed confidence, understanding that loyalty to Constantine promised both order and opportunity. Cities that had known instability began to experience structured governance once more, while citizens cautiously adapted to the new authority. One of Constantine's most transformative acts was the formal recognition of Christianity. Marcus observed communities gathering in discrete spaces, sharing rituals and teachings that had previously been suppressed. Though the city still contained temples of traditional Roman gods, a new faith began to flourish openly, offering citizens hope, moral guidance, and a sense of belonging amid the uncertainties of imperial change. Lucius, meanwhile, noted how soldiers from diverse backgrounds now navigated this shift, respecting religious tolerance while maintaining loyalty to the empire. The division of the empire formalized the realities that had been growing for decades. While Constantinople flourished as the eastern capital under strong leadership, the western provinces struggled to maintain control and stability. Lucius patrolled frontier towns, where legions were stretched thin, responding to repeated incursions from Visigoths, Vandals, and other tribes. Each campaign demanded enduring strategy and courage, yet the resources of the West were increasingly inadequate. Marcus felt the effects in daily life. Prices fluctuated, grain shortages became common, and civic services, once reliable, faltered under financial strain. Families adapted as best they could, storing food, reinforcing homes, and teaching children to navigate uncertainty. Citizens knew that survival required vigilance, patience, and cooperation, yet anxiety remained a constant companion. Political instability exacerbated the West's challenges. Emperors were often weak, short-lived, or installed by powerful generals rather than popular support. Lucius observed colleagues switching allegiances, commanders seizing power, and local governors attempting to maintain order in the face of fragmented authority. Trust was fragile, loyalty was tested, and every citizen learned to navigate a shifting landscape of power and threat. Barbarian pressures intensified. The Visigoths, fleeing the Huns, pressed into Roman territory, seeking shelter and resources. Lucius and his fellow soldiers faced difficult choices: defend borders with limited resources, negotiate terms, or risk catastrophic loss. Villages burned, towns fell, and civilians experienced displacement, fear, and loss. Marcus received letters from relatives in the provinces describing harrowing journeys, ruined estates, and the desperate search for safety. Despite adversity, daily life persisted. Citizens cooked meals, merchants sold goods, and children learned trades and skills that would sustain them. Lucius marched, patrolled, and trained recruits. Teaching resilience in a world where strategy and survival were inseparable, Marcus managed his bakery, ensuring that bread, an enduring symbol of sustenance and continuity, remained available to his neighbors. Ordinary acts of diligence became lifelines in a collapsing empire. Rome's grandeur faded gradually. Public buildings deteriorated, roads cracked, and aqueducts required constant repair. Lucius witnessed firsthand the challenges of maintaining infrastructure while defending borders. Marcus noted the decline in public festivals and ceremonies, once vibrant markers of civic identity, now subdued or abandoned. Yet amidst decay, the city's heartbeat persisted. People lived, worked, and adapted, embodying the enduring spirit of Rome. Economic strain and corruption deepened the West's vulnerability. Coins lost value, trade routes became unreliable, and local elites often prioritized personal survival over imperial loyalty. Marcus struggled with fluctuating prices for flour and grain, while soldiers like Lucius faced delayed or reduced pay. Families adapted, relying on community networks, bartering, and prudence to endure shortages and insecurity. The final blow came gradually. In 476 AD, Romulus Augustus, the last Western Roman emperor, was deposed by Odoacer, a barbarian commander. Lucius, witnessing the symbolic end of an era, felt both sorrow and acceptance. The empire he had served, defended, and adapted to 4 decades was no longer united under a single Western ruler. Citizens like Marcus braced for a future shaped more by local powers, tribal leaders, and the practical necessities of survival than by distant emperors. Even as the political structure collapsed, the cultural and social legacies of Rome endured. Architecture, law, language, and civic traditions persisted in everyday life. Lucius continued to train younger soldiers in discipline, courage, and resilience. Marcus maintained his bakery, taught his children civic responsibility, and preserved traditions that had sustained Roman life for centuries. Ordinary people became the custodians of an empire whose formal power had faded, but whose influence remained profound. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not erase history, it transformed it. Lucius patrolled streets that had seen centuries of change, aware that Rome's endurance now relied more on human adaptation than imperial authority. Marcus, kneading dough in the early morning light, reflected on the resilience, intelligence, and courage of ordinary citizens who kept the spirit of Rome alive amid political collapse. As night fell, the city of Rome settled into a quiet rhythm. Soldiers remained vigilant, families protected their homes, and markets operated under the ever-present tension of change. Lucius and Marcus understood that survival depended not on emperors, but on the careful, deliberate actions of those who lived within the city's walls. Rome's heart continued to beat, albeit differently, sustained by the courage, wisdom, and perseverance of its people. In the first light of dawn, Rome reflected both loss and continuity. The Western Empire had ended, yet the Eastern half, under Constantinople, carried forward Roman culture, law, and governance. Lucius prepared for another day of service, Marcus for another day of work, and families moved through streets shaped by history yet determined to endure. The fall of the Western Roman Empire became a lesson in resilience, adaptation, and the enduring strength of ordinary citizens whose lives had always been the true heartbeat of the empire. Rome, though politically fragmented, remained alive, its legacy embedded in the streets, the people, and the enduring spirit of an empire that had endured centuries of turmoil, adaptation, and change. The Western Empire's fall marked an end, but also a transformation, reminding all that the endurance of Rome depended not solely on emperors, but on the courage, determination, and wisdom of the citizens who carried its legacy forward. Rome's legacy continued to pulse strongly in the east. Constantinople, the new capital, gleamed on the shores of the Bosphorus, its walls formidable, its streets bustling with merchants, citizens, and soldiers. Lucius, now older and carrying decades of experience, had traveled east to serve the empire in this new heartland. The air smelled of salt water, spices from distant lands, and the rich aroma of markets alive with trade. Marcus, who had followed stories of the East from his home in Rome, arrived with his family seeking opportunity and stability. The city was a mosaic of cultures: Greeks, Romans, Armenians, Syrians, and traders from distant provinces converged, bringing goods, ideas, and stories. Citizens moved through streets lined with shops, public baths, and temples. Yet now, churches dedicated to the Christian faith shared prominence with traditional Roman architecture. Life in Constantinople was vibrant yet disciplined. Lucius observed legions stationed strategically along the city's formidable walls, ever vigilant against external threats. Soldiers trained rigorously, patrolled diligently, and coordinated with local authorities to ensure both the safety of citizens and the security of vital trade routes. Marcus, settling into his new bakery, noted how the city thrived because ordinary citizens, merchants, and soldiers all played their part in sustaining the heartbeat of the empire. Economic life flourished under careful administration. Markets brimmed with goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe. Spices, silks, ceramics, and grains arrived regularly, traded by merchants whose families had been part of this network for generations. Taxes were collected systematically, allowing public works and military infrastructure to remain strong. Marcus found pride in contributing to this system, kneading dough each morning for families who relied on his bread to start their day. Religion and culture intertwined seamlessly. Christianity was now a central part of civic life, yet Constantinople accommodated diversity with grace. Churches became places of community, charity, and learning, while the city's theaters, forums, and public spaces celebrated both tradition and innovation. Lucius noticed that morale among soldiers and citizens alike depended not only on governance but also on shared values and cultural cohesion. Daily routines reflected both continuity and adaptation. Marcus taught his children skills necessary for trade and survival while explaining the city's history and significance. Citizens moved through the city with awareness of rules, responsibilities, and opportunities. Soldiers maintained the city's defenses, monitored borders, and trained younger recruits, ensuring that military and civic life were interwoven in sustaining the empire's strength. Despite the city's stability, challenges persisted. External threats from northern tribes, Persian forces to the east, and occasional pirate incursions required constant vigilance. Lucius patrolled diligently, coordinating with commanders to maintain readiness. Marcus and his neighbors adapted to these pressures by organizing community networks, storing supplies, and teaching their children resilience and resourcefulness. The administration of Constantinople was meticulous. Governors, tax collectors, and officials operated under a system that combined Roman legal traditions with practical oversight. Citizens like Marcus observed that the city functioned because rules were enforced consistently, disputes were resolved fairly, and public infrastructure supported daily life. Roads, aqueducts, public baths, and marketplaces created a rhythm that shaped both economic activity and civic culture. Education and scholarship flourished. Libraries, churches, and academies offered learning opportunities for citizens of diverse backgrounds. Lucius noticed soldiers engaging with philosophy, strategy, and engineering, applying knowledge to both civic and military responsibilities. Marcus encouraged his children to read, learn trades, and participate in community life. Understanding that education was both a survival skill and a source of personal growth. Cultural festivals, religious observances, and civic ceremonies filled the calendar, maintaining the city's vibrancy. Citizens celebrated with music, food, and ritual, finding joy and meaning even amid the awareness of external threats. Soldiers marched in parades, drills, and religious observances, reinforcing discipline while strengthening communal ties. Lucius and Marcus recognized that the endurance of the city depended equally on structure, culture, and the dedication of ordinary people. Nightfall brought a quieter rhythm. Citizens retired to homes illuminated by oil lamps, merchants secured shops, and soldiers patrolled the walls. Lucius reflected on the resilience and adaptability that had allowed the Eastern Roman Empire to thrive while the West had fallen. Marcus whispered lessons to his children about courage, diligence, and the importance of community, understanding that survival and prosperity were deeply connected to daily life and civic participation. Constantinople's heartbeat was steady, disciplined, and vibrant. Soldiers maintained security, citizens engaged in trade and craft, and governance ensured fairness and stability. The city thrived because ordinary people, like Marcus and Lucius, embraced responsibility, adapted to challenges, and preserved both tradition and innovation. In the early morning light, Constantinople glimmered on the Bosphorus. Lucius prepared for patrols, Marcus for his bakery, and families moved through streets alive with commerce, faith, and daily routines. The Eastern Roman Empire endured as a testament to human resilience, strategic foresight, and the enduring spirit of citizens who sustained the empire's heartbeat. Rome's legacy, though politically shifted eastward, remained alive in architecture, law, culture, and daily life. Soldiers, merchants, and ordinary citizens ensured continuity, adapting to challenges while maintaining the essence of Roman identity. Constantinople embodied both stability and ambition, a city where survival, prosperity, and the spirit of Rome converged in a rhythm that sustained life, culture, and hope. And so, in the bustling streets, fortified walls, and marketplaces of Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire thrived. Lucius, Marcus, and countless citizens carried forward the legacy of Rome, ensuring that the empire's heart continued to beat strong, vigilant, and alive with the rhythm of daily life, culture, and enduring human resilience. The city of Constantinople shone like no other. Its golden domes glittered in the sun, reflecting the empire's ambition and resilience. Lucius, a veteran soldier now serving in the elite guard, walked the streets with awe. The city had grown in splendor under the rule of Emperor Justinian, whose vision extended beyond military conquest to culture, law, and architecture. Marcus, who had traveled from his family's bakery in Rome to Constantinople years earlier, marveled at the construction taking place everywhere. Citizens whispered excitedly about the new churches, bridges, and palaces rising across the city. Among them, the most remarkable was the Hagia Sophia, a magnificent cathedral that promised to stand as a testament to both faith and imperial power. Marcus imagined generations of families worshipping beneath its soaring domes, their prayers merging with the heartbeat of the city itself. Justinian's ambition was matched by his determination to reform law and governance. Lucius saw soldiers and administrators enforcing new codes of justice, designed to standardize procedures, reduce corruption, and strengthen the empire's foundations. Citizens, including Marcus, found both reassurance and challenge in these reforms. Fairness was emphasized, yet obligations and duties were strictly enforced. Life required diligence, attentiveness, and a willingness to adapt to the emperor's vision. Military campaigns expanded the empire's borders and reclaimed territories lost centuries earlier. Lucius marched with legions across distant lands, witnessing battles, fortification efforts, and the logistics of sustaining armies far from home. Citizens in the city, including Marcus, followed these campaigns through letters, traders, stories, and public announcements. Victory brought pride and opportunity, yet also demanded sacrifice and vigilance, as each soldier's duty was intertwined with the survival and prosperity of the empire. The economy thrived amidst these ambitious projects, but not without strain. Construction, military campaigns, and administration required resources. Marcus found himself adjusting the bakery's operations to meet rising demand from citizens, soldiers, and workers. Markets buzzed with commerce, yet families carefully budgeted. Understanding that the city's grandeur depended on collective effort and prudent management, daily life in Constantinople blended tradition with innovation. Streets were alive with merchants, children playing, and public celebrations marking both religious and civic occasions. Lucius oversaw the security of major roads and bridges, ensuring that citizens moved safely even as construction reshaped the city. Marcus guided his children through these busy streets, teaching them both the rhythms of daily life and the importance of respect, diligence, and community responsibility. Religion became central to public life. Christianity, now firmly established, influenced governance, culture, and social norms. Churches served not only as places of worship but also as centers of charity, education, and civic cohesion. Citizens attended services, participated in festivals, and contributed to communal life. Lucius observed soldiers attending Mass alongside citizens, recognizing that faith strengthened morale and social unity. Yet challenges persisted. Epidemics, occasional invasions, and the demands of ambitious projects tested both soldiers and civilians. Lucius and his comrades remained vigilant along borders, while Marcus and fellow citizens adapted to disruptions in supply and the pressures of urban life. Families relied on community networks for support, teaching children resilience, resourcefulness, and the capacity to endure hardship while embracing opportunity. The codification of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, reflected Justinian's vision for order, fairness, and clarity. Citizens, including Marcus, benefited from clearer legal processes, protection of property, and defined civic responsibilities. Lucius saw justice applied consistently, though enforcement required dedication and sometimes strict measures. Life in Constantinople demanded both compliance and participation, teaching citizens that their actions, duties, and choices shaped the city's enduring strength. Architecture and public works transformed the cityscape. Aqueducts, roads, bridges, and fortifications reflected both practical necessity and imperial pride. Marcus admired the intricate details of public buildings, the precision of bridges spanning waterways, and the grandeur of palaces. Lucius recognized that these projects not only displayed imperial power, but also ensured security, mobility, and prosperity for the citizens and armies alike. Evenings in Constantinople carried a rhythm of reflection and community. Families gathered for meals, soldiers rested and prepared for patrols, and merchants counted coins and secured goods. Marcus taught his children stories of the city's growth, the achievements of Justinian, and the resilience required to thrive. Lucius reflected on his decades of service, understanding that the empire's strength relied not merely on ambition or architecture, but on the dedication, courage, and vigilance of ordinary people. As night fell, the domes and towers of Constantinople glimmered under the moonlight. Citizens slept with cautious peace, soldiers patrolled diligently, and families whispered prayers for health, prosperity, and protection. Marcus and Lucius, each in their own way, understood that the city's heartbeat, vibrant, disciplined, and resilient, depended on daily acts of care, courage, and responsibility. Justinian's reign, marked by conquest, law, and monumental architecture, illustrated the potential of vision combined with human effort. Constantinople thrived because ordinary citizens, soldiers, and administrators embraced their roles in a system that demanded participation, diligence, and resilience. Marcus bred nourished citizens and workers, soldiers like Lucius protected the city, and families maintained the social and cultural fabric that allowed Byzantium to shine. In the first light of dawn, Constantinople reflected the empire's enduring glory. Lucius prepared for another day of patrols, Marcus for the morning's baking, and families quietly moved through streets alive with commerce, worship, and civic life. The Eastern Roman Empire, under Justinian's guidance, had forged a city and society capable of thriving in both prosperity and challenge, testament to the enduring spirit of citizens, soldiers, and visionaries whose dedication sustained Byzantium's heartbeat. And so, the empire thrived. Constantinople stood as a symbol of strength, culture, and resilience. Citizens, soldiers, and families contributed to a rhythm of life that ensured the legacy of Rome endured. The glory of Justinian's Byzantium was not only in palaces and churches, but in the everyday courage, care, and perseverance of ordinary people who lived, worked, and safeguarded the empire's future. The Eastern Roman Empire, proud and resilient, faced new trials. Constantinople remained a beacon of wealth, faith, and culture, yet beneath its golden domes, the city and its citizens experienced turbulence that tested their faith, loyalty, and daily life. Lucius, a veteran soldier stationed along the city's fortified walls, noticed the whispers of tension spreading through the streets. Citizens debated, merchants worried, and families prepared for uncertainties that no amount of vigilance could entirely prevent. Marcus, now a master baker with a thriving business, observed changes in the city's rhythm. Taxes increased to fund military campaigns against both external enemies and rebellious regions. Soldiers patrolled more frequently, and citizens felt the weight of stricter regulations, inspections, and social expectations. Children learned early that their city, while magnificent, required constant diligence, adaptability, and resilience. One of the most divisive issues was iconoclasm, the policy of removing and destroying religious images. Some citizens supported it, believing it purified worship and strengthened faith. Others opposed it, valuing the beauty, history, and tradition of sacred art. Marcus, navigating this tension, saw neighbors arguing passionately outside churches. Lucius witnessed soldiers enforcing imperial decrees, sometimes facing angry crowds or subtle acts of defiance. Daily life became a negotiation between tradition, authority, and personal belief. Economic pressure intensified alongside religious controversy. Constantinople, reliant on trade from Asia, Africa, and Europe, experienced occasional disruptions due to political instability and military campaigns. Marcus adjusted his bakery's operations to meet fluctuations in demand and supply, ensuring that families, soldiers, traders, and ordinary citizens received bread. Markets were alive with negotiation, yet tension lingered as resources became precious and opportunities uncertain. Military vigilance remained crucial. Lucius patrolled walls and bridges, ensuring that the city was prepared for external threats from Bulgar Slavs and Arab forces pressing on Byzantium's borders. Soldiers trained rigorously, coordinated with naval fleets, and adapted to evolving warfare strategies. Citizens learned to coexist with the presence of armed men, understanding that protection came at the cost of constant alertness and discipline. Religious and political authority intertwined in complex ways. The emperor's decisions on iconoclasm directly affected civic life, social standing, and economic opportunity. Marcus carefully explained to his children that loyalty to the empire often meant navigating nuanced moral and social choices. Lucius recognized that soldiers were not only defenders of territory but also enforcers of imperial policy, balancing force with diplomacy in a society divided over belief. Despite these challenges, Constantinople thrived culturally. Citizens engaged in learning, trade, and artistic endeavors, even under the pressures of ideological disputes. Schools, libraries, and public gatherings remained centers of intellectual activity. Marcus encouraged his children to read, learn trades, and observe carefully the evolving customs and rules of their city. Lucius observed that morale, cohesion, and resilience depended on maintaining civic life amidst uncertainty and debate. Daily routines adapted to turbulence, Markets opened with cautious energy, workshops and bakeries maintained production, and families reinforced community ties. Citizens found solace in rituals, both public and private. Whether in church, at home, or during festivals, soldiers balanced duties of defense with engagement in civic and religious life, demonstrating that stability required cooperation between military, civilian, and religious spheres. Conflict and debate over iconoclasm occasionally erupted in public spaces. Marcus witnessed quiet acts of resistance, subtle displays of devotion, and negotiations between community leaders and authorities. Lucius ensured that these disputes did not escalate into violence, understanding that civic cohesion required both enforcement and empathy. Citizens learned to adapt to ideological shifts while maintaining daily life, commerce, and social bonds. Evening in Constantinople carried both beauty and tension. Streets glimmered under oil lamps, marketplaces quieted, and families gathered for meals, sharing stories of survival, faith, and adaptation. Lucius reflected on the complexity of his role defending the city, physically while also navigating the moral and social challenges of iconoclasm. Marcus taught his children resilience, careful judgment, and the importance of understanding multiple perspectives in a world where law, faith, and daily life intersected.
The city's fortifications and infrastructure remained vital. Walls, gates, aqueducts, and roads were maintained despite pressures from conflict and scarcity. Lucius supervised repairs and training, ensuring that the empire's security relied not only on manpower but on careful planning and dedication. Citizens, including Marcus, contributed to the resilience of the city through work, trade, and vigilance. Religious devotion remained central to life, even amid division. Icons, prayers, and ceremonies reflected the personal faith of citizens. While debates over their legitimacy challenged communal cohesion, Marcus found ways to respect tradition while complying with new regulations, teaching children to balance respect for authority with the value of heritage. Lucius, meanwhile, saw soldiers guided by both duty and conscience, navigating orders and moral ambiguity. Nightfall brought the city a moment of quiet reflection. Constantinople rested under the watchful glow of lamps and stars. Soldiers patrolled vigilantly, citizens cared for homes and families, and community networks sustained a fragile sense of stability. Marcus whispered stories of courage, adaptation, and faith to his children, while Lucius considered the enduring strength of those who maintained life amidst ideological and external pressures. By dawn, the city prepared for another day. Markets, workshops, and streets awakened with disciplined energy. Soldiers maintained readiness. Citizens balanced duties and aspiration, and families navigated the complexities of life in an empire facing both external and internal trials. Constantinople endured because resilience, adaptation, and dedication were woven into the daily rhythm of its people. The iconoclasm period illustrated the challenges of governance, faith, and daily survival. Constantinople's endurance relied on citizens, soldiers, and administrators working together to sustain life, commerce, security, and culture. Marcus, Lucius, and countless others embodied the city's spirit, persistent, adaptive, and committed to maintaining both continuity and hope. And so, amidst debate, vigilance, and daily life, Constantinople continued to thrive. Citizens, soldiers, and families contributed to a living, breathing empire, navigating challenges with courage, intelligence, and perseverance. The Eastern Roman Empire, though tested, endured, its heartbeat maintained by the ordinary people whose diligence, faith, and resilience carried Byzantium through periods of ideological and political turbulence. Constantinople had weathered centuries of upheaval, yet under the Macedonian emperors, the city experienced a renaissance that restored pride, stability, and cultural brilliance. Lucius, now an elder statesman among the city's soldiers, observed the transformation firsthand. Walls were repaired and strengthened, markets buzzed with activity, and the streets carried a renewed sense of order and purpose. Marcus, still tending his bakery, noticed the flourishing of trade and craft. Goods from the Mediterranean, Asia, and Northern Europe arrived regularly, filling marketplaces with spices, silks, and fine wares. The city thrived economically as taxes were managed efficiently, civic infrastructure was maintained, and citizens had confidence that their labor and commerce would be rewarded. Families planned for the future, and children played in streets that shimmered with energy and possibility. Military strength reinforced this revival. Lucius trained new recruits, patrolled borders, and advised commanders. The Macedonian emperors expanded the empire's influence through strategic campaigns, fortifying frontiers against Bulgars, Arabs, and other threats. Soldiers maintained vigilance, yet morale was high because victories restored prestige. Resources flowed steadily, and governance was consistent. The empire's defense and daily life were intertwined, and citizens earned that the safety and prosperity of the city relied on disciplined coordination between soldiers and civilians. Culture and scholarship flourished. Libraries, schools, and churches became centers of learning and creativity. Marcus encouraged his children to study, engage with art, and observe civic life, understanding that knowledge and culture were vital to both personal growth and the city's strength. Citizens enjoy festivals, theatrical performances, and public ceremonies, which reinforce social cohesion. While celebrating Byzantine identity, religious life remained central, yet more harmonious than during the iconoclasm era. Churches were centers of community, charity, and learning. Citizens, including Marcus, found inspiration in faith while participating actively in the city's civic and cultural life. Lucius observed soldiers attending services alongside civilians, understanding that faith contributed to both morale and social unity. Economic stability allowed the city to undertake ambitious construction projects. Roads were repaired, bridges reinforced, and public buildings restored. Marcus marveled at new marketplaces and civic spaces, understanding that infrastructure supported commerce, security, and daily life. Soldiers like Lucius contributed to fortifications and logistics, blending military duties with civic responsibility. Together, citizens and soldiers maintained a rhythm that balanced growth, stability, and protection. Daily life reflected renewed prosperity. Citizens moved confidently through the streets, children learned trades and literacy, and families invested in both education and community. Marcus trained apprentices in baking, while Lucius guided younger soldiers in discipline, strategy, and the importance of protecting the city's citizens. Every day, ordinary actions contributed to the empire's enduring strength and resilience. The Macedonian Renaissance was not without challenges. External threats, regional uprisings, and the constant management of resources demanded vigilance. Lucius patrolled borders, negotiated with local leaders, and maintained readiness. Marcus adapted production to meet demand fluctuations and advised his children on prudence, resourcefulness, and the importance of cooperation in sustaining a thriving city. Art and literature reached new heights. Citizens enjoy mosaics, illuminated manuscripts, and architecture that reflected both religious devotion and imperial grandeur. Public ceremonies, parades, and festivals reinforced social bonds, reminding citizens that they were part of a larger, enduring legacy. Lucius and Marcus recognized that stability and prosperity depended equally on governance, culture, and the dedication of ordinary people. Evenings carried a rhythm of reflection, care, and communal life. Citizens gathered for meals, shared stories, and observed rituals. Soldiers patrolled vigilantly, ensuring that commerce and social activity could continue safely. Marcus taught lessons of resilience, prudence, and civic duty to his children, while Lucius reflected on the city's renewal and the role of discipline, courage, and wisdom in maintaining order and prosperity. By dawn, Constantinople shone with renewed energy. Streets filled with merchants, soldiers marched in formation, and citizens embraced daily routines with confidence. The Macedonian Renaissance demonstrated the power of strong leadership, disciplined governance, and the integration of military, civic, and cultural life. Ordinary citizens, soldiers, and families were the lifeblood of the empire, sustaining Byzantium's heartbeat through diligence, courage, and collaboration. The revival strengthened Constantinople's identity as the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire. Lucius patrolled the walls with pride. Marcus prepared bread for bustling markets, and families moved through streets alive with commerce, worship, and education. The empire endured not merely because of imperial vision, but because ordinary people embraced responsibility, adapted to challenges, and contributed to a thriving civic life. Constantinople's Macedonian era embodied stability, culture, and resilience. Soldiers, citizens, and families worked together, ensuring that the city remained secure, prosperous, and vibrant. The heartbeat of Byzantium persisted through everyday acts of courage, diligence, and community, a living testament to the enduring strength of a city and its people. And so, under the Macedonian emperors, Byzantium flourished. Constantinople became a center of military strength, economic prosperity, cultural achievement, and civic pride. Lucius, Marcus, and countless ordinary citizens carried forward the legacy of Rome, proving that the survival and greatness of an empire depended on the courage, wisdom, and perseverance of those who lived, worked, and protected it every day. Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire, had thrived for centuries, its golden domes reflecting the empire's enduring strength and cultural richness. Yet in the late 11th century, storm clouds gathered over the city as news of the First Crusade reached its streets. Lucius, an experienced soldier now stationed in the elite guard, felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. The empire's borders were secure, but the arrival of thousands of foreign warriors would bring new challenges, both political and social. Marcus, still tending his bakery, noticed the stir in the markets and forums. Merchants whispered about the Crusaders' journey westward, nobles debated strategy in hushed tones, and ordinary citizens felt uncertainty creeping into daily life. Children played, yet even their laughter carried a hint of tension, for everyone understood that their city, though magnificent, was on the threshold of unprecedented change. The arrival of the Crusaders was both a blessing and a threat. Lucius supervised their integration into the city temporarily, ensuring discipline while recognizing their unpredictable behavior. Marcus observed the influx of foreign troops demanding food, lodging, and supplies, straining the city's economy. Citizens had to adapt quickly, balancing hospitality with caution, while soldiers maintained vigilance to prevent disorder. Trade and commerce experienced both opportunity and disruption. Merchants supplied goods to crusaders, increasing profit, but resource shortages also emerged. Marcus adjusted his bakery's production, preparing extra bread, on navigating supply challenges. The city's markets buzzed with activity, yet tension lingered. Every loaf, every shipment, reflected the delicate balance between prosperity and scarcity. Political intrigue deepened. Crusaders, though ostensibly allies, sometimes acted independently, seeking influence or advantage. Lucius and his fellow soldiers had to navigate delicate negotiations, balancing loyalty to the emperor with the unpredictable ambitions of foreign forces. Citizens, including Marcus, watched carefully, understanding that the safety and prosperity of Constantinople depended on both diplomacy and military discipline. Religious identity added complexity. Constantinople remained the heart of Eastern Orthodoxy, Yet Latin crusaders carried their own beliefs and practices. Religious ceremonies, festivals, and daily worship became subtle sites of negotiation, compromise, and, at times, conflict. Marcus explained to his children that faith could unite, yet misunderstandings might divide, and careful respect for both tradition and authority was essential. Lucius observed the military impact of the Crusades. Soldiers coordinated with Crusader leaders, protecting the city while ensuring that foreign troops did not overstep boundaries. Training and patrols intensified, fortifications were reinforced, and vigilance became routine. Citizens grew accustomed to soldiers escorting convoys, regulating marketplaces, and supervising accommodations for crusaders. Daily life intertwined with security, teaching resilience and adaptation.
Despite challenges, cultural exchange flourished. Crusaders brought new ideas, crafts, and stories from distant lands. Citizens absorbed elements of Western European culture while maintaining Byzantine traditions. Marcus' bakery received new recipes and techniques, which he adapted for local tastes, demonstrating how ordinary citizens contributed to cultural integration and innovation. Soldiers and citizens alike learned that coexistence, while challenging, could enrich city life. Yet tensions remained. The Fourth Crusade, culminating in 1204, brought devastation unimaginable to the city's citizens. Lucius, commanding troops in the city's defense, faced an impossible situation. Centuries of preparation and fortification could not prevent betrayal by the very forces once considered allies. Citizens, including Marcus and his family, witnessed the sacking of Constantinople, the looting of churches and homes, and the displacement of countless people. Fear, grief, and loss shadowed the streets that had long been the empire's pride. Daily routines were shattered. Marcus struggled to maintain his bakery, protecting what little remained, while Lucius coordinated defense and evacuation efforts. Families huddled in homes or sought refuge in safer districts, relying on community networks for survival. The vibrant rhythm of the city, the markets, festivals, and civic life was replaced by vigilance, mourning, and adaptation to a harsh new reality. The impact of the Crusades on Byzantium was profound and lasting. Politically, the empire was weakened, its territory fragmented, and its authority challenged. Economically, trade was disrupted, wealth plundered, and resources diverted. Socially, citizens faced trauma, displacement, and uncertainty. Yet even in the darkest days, resilience persisted. Lucius taught younger soldiers courage and strategy, while Marcus nurtured hope, adapting his craft and supporting neighbors as best he could. The aftermath reshaped Constantinople. Recovery took decades, requiring reconstruction, administrative reform, and the restoration of civic life. Citizens learned that survival depended on adaptation, community cohesion, and the steady rhythm of everyday work. Markets reopened, bakeries like Marcus resumed production, and soldiers maintained order while defending against ongoing threats. Ordinary actions, baking bread, patrolling streets, educating children, became acts of civic perseverance. Faith remained central, offering solace and structure. Citizens gathered in rebuilt churches, attended rituals, and participated in charitable activities, finding meaning amid chaos. Lucius observed that soldiers and civilians alike drew strength from shared belief, which reinforced social cohesion and personal resilience. Marcus taught his children that faith, courage, and diligence were essential not only for survival but for sustaining the identity of Constantinople itself. Evening brought reflection. The city glimmered under lantern light, yet shadows of loss and caution lingered. Soldiers patrolled vigilantly, citizens cared for their homes, and families whispered stories of survival, courage, and hope. The impact of the Crusades would echo for generations, yet Constantinople endured because ordinary people, like Marcus and Lucius, maintained continuity, culture, and daily life amid adversity. By dawn, the city prepared to face another day. Markets opened, soldiers marched, and families resumed routines, integrating lessons of resilience, vigilance, and adaptability. The Crusades, both a source of opportunity and devastation, had altered Constantinople's trajectory, yet the city's heartbeat persisted, maintained by the courage, wisdom, and perseverance of its people. The story of the Crusades underscored a timeless truth. Empires could be challenged, wealth and power could be disrupted. Yet the enduring strength of a city relied on its citizens' determination to rebuild, adapt, and sustain life. Marcus needed dough, Lucius trained recruits, and families navigated streets with coordinary acts that preserved the spirit of Byzantium through trials, uncertainty, and the weight of history. And so, Constantinople endured. The impact of the Crusades marked a chapter of loss and resilience, teaching citizens, soldiers, and families that the survival and identity of their city depended not solely on emperors or armies, but on the everyday courage, dedication, and adaptability of those who lived, worked, and protected the empire every day. The grand walls of Constantinople had withstood centuries of sieges, invasions, and internal turmoil. Lucius, now an elder soldier with decades of service behind him, walked along the battlements, eyes scanning the horizon. The threat of a new enemy loomed: the Ottomans, a rising power from the east, growing in strength, skill, and ambition. Every day brought news of their conquest of surrounding territories, their growing armies, and their relentless advance toward the city. Marcus, still tending his bakery, felt the anxiety ripple through the streets. Citizens whispered about distant towns falling, villagers being conquered, and soldiers preparing for conflict. Children sensed the tension, playing cautiously in alleys, while families stored provisions and reinforced their homes. The city, magnificent as it was, carried the weight of anticipation and fear. The city's defenses were impressive but strained. Lucius oversaw soldiers maintaining and repairing walls, guarding gates, and training new recruits. Soldiers drilled relentlessly, understanding that the survival of Constantinople depended on discipline, coordination, and unyielding vigilance. Citizens contributed by reinforcing homes, storing food, and supporting military logistics. Every ordinary action baking bread, delivering supplies, educating children was tied to the city's endurance. Trade and economy were under pressure. The Ottomans' rise disrupted trade routes connecting Constantinople to Europe and Asia. Marcus adapted his bakery operations, ensuring that bread, the lifeblood of the city, reached those in need despite scarcity. Merchants negotiated carefully, balancing profit with the need for stability. Citizens understood that their daily labor, commerce, and cooperation were essential to survival amid growing external threats. The social fabric of the city was tested. Anxiety and tension increased as citizens contemplated the consequences of a potential siege. Lucius noticed both courage and fear among the troops. Soldiers shared stories of previous battles, drawing lessons from the past, while ordinary citizens, including Marcus, learned that resilience meant adapting to uncertainty with diligence, prudence, and courage. Religion played a central role in maintaining morale. Churches offered solace, structure, and hope, reminding citizens of faith and community. Families prayed for safety, soldiers attended services before battles, and citizens found meaning in rituals that strengthened social cohesion. Marcus explained to his children that faith provided not only comfort but also guidance in navigating times of crisis and uncertainty. Despite preparation, the city could not remain insulated forever. The Ottomans advanced with growing skill and strategy. Lucius coordinated with commanders to deploy soldiers along critical points, repairing walls, reinforcing gates, and strategizing defense. Citizens, aware of the stakes, participated by observing regulations, assisting with supplies, and maintaining vigilance. The city became a living network of collaboration, courage, and endurance. As siege preparations intensified, Marcus noticed the psychological toll on families. Nights were long, streets quieter, and conversations carried the weight of worry. Yet daily routines persisted. Children learned trades, bakers prepared bread, soldiers drilled and patrolled, and citizens maintained homes. Ordinary actions became extraordinary in their significance, sustaining life amid looming peril. When the siege began in 1453, the city faced a relentless onslaught. Lucius and his comrades fought courageously, defending walls, gates, and citizens against cannon fire, scaling ladders, and relentless assaults. Marcus and his neighbors struggled to sustain daily life amid chaos, distributing bread, tending to the injured, and supporting families displaced by attacks. Every act, big or small, was vital to the survival of the city and its people. The fall of Constantinople was devastating. Lucius witnessed the collapse of centuries of preparation, the breach of walls, and the loss of countless lives. Citizens, including Marcus and his family, faced displacement, grief, and the end of a familiar world. Yet, even amid despair, acts of courage, care, and perseverance persisted. Soldiers protected civilians where possible. Neighbors aided each other, and families clung to hope. The Ottoman conquest marked the end of the Byzantine Empire. Yet the city's legacy endured in art, architecture, religion, and culture. Marcus rebuilt his life, passing knowledge and resilience to his children. Lucius, reflecting on decades of service, recognized that the spirit of Byzantium survived not solely through walls or armies, but through the courage, discipline, and determination of its people. Daily life slowly adapted under new rule. Citizens maintained routines, engaged in trade, and preserved traditions while learning to navigate a changed political landscape. Marcus continued baking, teaching skills, and contributing to community cohesion. Lucius trained younger men, sharing lessons of vigilance, strategy, and civic responsibility. Ordinary people became custodians of the city's legacy, bridging the past and future through perseverance. Faith remained a source of resilience. Churches, now under new oversight, continued to offer spiritual guidance and community support. Families passed down stories of courage, history, and adaptation, ensuring that knowledge and tradition survived the empire's collapse. Marcus and Lucius, in their own ways, preserved the values of Byzantium: discipline, courage, faith, and community. Constantinople's fall illustrated the vulnerability of even the most enduring empires, yet also highlighted the power of human resilience. Soldiers defended tirelessly, citizens adapted creatively, and families maintained hope. Every loaf of bread, every patrolled street, and every lesson taught to children became part of a living legacy that transcended conquest. By dawn, after the siege, the city began to breathe again. Life resumed in new forms, blending continuity with change. Marcus prepared bread for families, Lucius advised younger soldiers, and citizens navigated streets imbued with centuries of memory, culture, and human endeavor. Though the Byzantine Empire had ended, the spirit of Constantinople, the courage, resilience, and ingenuity of its people endured. And so, the rise of the Ottomans marked both an ending and a transformation. The empire's political power had collapsed, yet the legacy of Byzantium survived in its citizens' hearts, in its culture, and in the city itself. Lucius, Marcus, and countless others carried forward the lessons of courage, adaptation, and perseverance, ensuring that the heartbeat of Constantinople continued even under new rulers. The streets of Constantinople, though scarred by years of conflict, still echoed with the rhythm of life. Marcus, the seasoned baker whose family had served the city for generations, opened his shop as sunlight spilled over the cobbled streets. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of spices, fish, and merchants' wares, creating a familiar, comforting tapestry amid a city often shadowed by uncertainty. Citizens moved with purpose. Merchants called out their goods, children ran between stalls, and craftsmen hammered and carved in workshops. Despite the looming threat of Ottoman forces, everyday life persisted. Families navigated markets with care, yet also with familiarity. Life required adaptation, but not surrender. Marcus taught his children the art of baking while explaining the importance of diligence, patience, and service to the community. Lucius, an elder soldier by now, walked the streets to observe both discipline and morale. Soldiers patrolled the city's walls and gates, coordinated with commanders, and ensured citizens moved safely even as threats loomed. He noted how ordinary citizens contributed to the city's endurance. Carpenters repaired doors, merchants supplied provisions, and families maintained homes. The rhythm of daily life was inseparable from the vigilance required to protect the city. Education and learning persisted, even under pressure. Children attended church schools, learned trades, or practiced reading and writing at home. Knowledge was both practical and cultural. Learning how to navigate commerce, read scripture, and maintain social connections prepared young citizens for a city where every act mattered. Marcus encouraged his children to observe both their elders and the city, understanding that resilience came from knowledge and adaptability. Religion remained central. Churches served as places of worship, education, and community support. Citizens attended services, participated in festivals, and contributed to charitable activities. Even as political power waned, faith offered guidance, comfort, and social cohesion. Lucius noted that soldiers often prayed before patrols, drawing strength from rituals that connected them to the city, its history, and their collective identity. Daily routines reflected both continuity and caution. Markets opened early, bakeries prepared bread, artisans created, and tradesmen repaired homes and public spaces. Citizens adapted to resource limitations, rationed carefully, and prioritized both survival and communal responsibility. Marcus managed his bakery with care, ensuring families and soldiers received nourishment, while teaching apprentices the value of patience, skill, and generosity. Community life intertwined with vigilance. Citizens shared information, supported neighbors during shortages, and helped families displaced by conflict. Soldiers maintained security, but ordinary acts sharing food, maintaining order. Educating children sustained the city's heartbeat. Marcus understood that every loaf baked, every home repaired, and every child taught was an act of resilience, a contribution to the enduring spirit of Constantinople. Festivals and public celebrations continued, even amid adversity. Citizens gathered for religious observances, weddings, and cultural events. Music, dance, and storytelling offered both joy and reflection. Lucius watched soldiers march during ceremonies, maintaining order while participating in the city's cultural life. These moments reinforced unity, reminded citizens of shared identity, and provided relief from the pressures of uncertainty. Evenings brought a rhythm of reflection and family life. Streets quieted, oil lamps flickered, and citizens gathered for meals. Marcus shared stories of history, trade, and resilience with his children, teaching lessons that combined survival, morality, and community. Lucius walked the walls, observing both the beauty and fragility of the city, understanding that protection required vigilance, courage, and dedication. Challenges persisted. Resource shortages, occasional raids, and political uncertainty shaped life in Constantinople. Citizens adapted creatively, storing provisions, coordinating with neighbors, and innovating in trade and craft. Soldiers trained continuously, patrolled diligently, and advised civilians on safety measures. Daily life was a careful balance of routine and preparedness, hope and realism. Through it all, ordinary people maintained the city's cultural and social fabric. Marcus' bakery fed families, neighbors supported one another, and soldiers defended the walls. Education, faith, and civic engagement ensured that knowledge, tradition, and resilience passed to the next generation. Life in late Byzantium, while often challenging, reflected the endurance, ingenuity, and courage of its citizens. By dawn, Constantinople awoke once more. Markets hummed with activity, artisans worked, and soldiers patrolled. Families navigated streets with care, yet embraced routine, creativity, and hope. Marcus kneaded dough, teaching children, while Lucius trained recruits and maintained vigilance. The city's heartbeat ordinary actions combined with courage, knowledge, and communiticist identity and resilience. Late Byzantine life illustrated a profound lesson. Even under threat and uncertainty, the rhythm of daily life, the dedication of ordinary people, and the persistence of culture and faith could maintain a city's spirit. Marcus, Lucius, and countless citizens embodied resilience, teaching future generations that survival, identity, and community depended on courage, diligence, and hope. And so, in the streets, markets, and homes of Constantinople, life endured. Citizens worked, learned, and worshipped. Soldiers patrolled and defended. Families cared for children and neighbors. The late Byzantine city, though facing immense challenges, survived because its people preserved daily routines, cultural identity, and a commitment to one another, legacy of endurance, adaptation, and the human spirit that would echo far beyond the empire's political fall. The golden domes of Constantinople gleamed in the morning sun, a city that had endured centuries of sieges, rebellions, and triumphs. Yet, in 1453, an ominous shadow stretched over the walls. The Ottomans, led by Sultan Mehmed II, had amassed an army and advanced relentlessly toward the city. Lucius, an experienced soldier now among the last defenders, walked the battlements, his heart heavy but resolute. The fate of the Eastern Roman Empire rested on the courage and endurance of those who remained. Marcus, still tending his bakery, felt a deep unease. Families whispered prayers, stored provisions, and prepared for the worst. Children, sensing the tension, stayed close to parents. While neighbors shared information and comfort, the city's vibrant rhythm, the markets, workshops, and festivals had slowed, replaced by vigilance, fear, and quiet determination. Every citizen, soldier, and family understood that their lives and the legacy of centuries hung in the balance. The siege began with a thunderous assault. Cannons roared, battering the ancient walls, while Ottoman archers rained arrows upon defenders. Lucius and his comrades fought valiantly, manning towers, repairing breaches, and coordinating counterattacks. Every step forward by the enemy was met with courage, ingenuity, and unyielding effort. Citizens, including Marcus, assisted as best they could, carrying water, tending the wounded, and supporting the soldiers' tireless defense. For weeks, the city endured relentless pressure. Food and resources dwindled, exhaustion mounted, and fear pervaded every corner. Marcus worked tirelessly in his bakery, ensuring soldiers and civilians alike received sustenance. Neighbors shared what little they had, reinforcing the bonds of community and solidarity. Children learned lessons of courage and resilience amidst the chaos, understanding that survival required both action and patience. Lucius witnessed acts of heroism and sacrifice. Soldiers held positions against overwhelming odds, citizens resisted panic, and families clung to hope. Every wall defended, every resource conserved, and every instruction followed was a thread in the fragile fabric keeping the city alive. Yet, even the most resilient could sense that the end was approaching. The final assault was catastrophic. Ottoman forces breached the walls using massive cannons and sheer force. Lucius and his comrades fought to the last, attempting to repel the invaders, but the city's defenses, though legendary, could not withstand the overwhelming siege. Citizens, including Marcus, witnessed devastation. Homes burned, treasures looted, and centuries of history consumed by fire and steel. Families fled where they could, some lost forever, others taken prisoner, despite the horror, acts of courage and compassion persisted. Marcus helped guide neighbors to safety, sharing food and shelter when possible. Lucius fought to protect civilians, prioritizing the survival of the vulnerable, even as soldiers fell around him. The city's heartbeat, though battered, persisted through ordinary acts of bravery, care, and resilience. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire. Centuries of culture, art, faith, and governance were violently disrupted. Citizens faced exile, loss, or subjugation under Ottoman rule. Marcus mourned the destruction of familiar streets, the looting of cherished buildings, and the displacement of families he had known all his life. Lucius, reflecting on decades of service, recognized the weight of history and the endurance of human spirit amidst irreversible change. Daily life transformed immediately. Marcus struggled to rebuild, finding ways to sustain his family and assist neighbors. Soldiers like Lucius were either integrated into new structures, captured, or perished defending the city. Citizens navigated a new political reality, learning to preserve traditions, culture, and faith under foreign rule. The resilience, adaptability, and solidarity that had sustained the city for centuries became essential tools for survival. Evenings, once filled with festivals, trade, and community, became quieter and reflective. Families huddled together, sharing stories of survival, courage, and history. Children learned both practical skills and lessons of endurance, understanding that life required adaptation, vigilance, and hope, even amidst loss. Marcus and Lucius imparted wisdom gained through years of experience, the importance of courage, community, and perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. Faith became both solace and a form of resistance. Churches, though damaged and often repurposed, remained centers for spiritual support. Citizens maintained rituals, prayed for protection, and taught children the values of resilience and morality. Marcus, guiding his family and neighbors, emphasized that faith and community were vital for preserving identity, culture, and memory, even when the political order had vanished. By dawn, after the conquest, Constantinople was irrevocably changed. Streets once bustling with traders and artisans now bore scars of siege. Families, soldiers, and citizens rebuilt what they could, preserving memory and culture while adapting to Ottoman governance. Marcus continued baking, helping feed families and workers, while Lucius, if surviving, advised on rebuilding defenses and maintaining order. The city's legacy persisted through the courage and determination of ordinary people. The fall of Constantinople underscored a timeless truth. Empires may collapse, walls may fall, and leaders may perish. But the spirit of citizens, their courage, resilience, and community endures. Marcus bred nourished survivors. Lucius' guidance shaped young defenders. And families preserved stories, knowledge, and faith for future generations. Even in defeat, the human spirit remained unbroken. Centuries of Byzantine history had culminated in that day of loss, yet the heartbeat of Constantinople continued, maintained by ordinary people who embraced survival, adaptation, and hope. The city's legacy, culture, and identity persisted in hearts, stories, and traditions, ensuring that even the end of an empire could not erase the spirit of its people. And so, Constantinople fell. But the stories of its citizens' courage, resilience, and enduring hope lived on, teaching future generations the lessons of perseverance, community, and the enduring power of human spirit amidst the rise and fall of empires. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked the end of the Byzantine Empire as a political power. Yet its legacy endured far beyond the city walls. Marcus, older now and reflecting on decades of life, understood that while empires might crumble, the ideas, culture, and lessons they leave behind could shape generations. Lucius, if surviving, had passed down stories of courage, discipline, and resilience to younger soldiers, who in turn carried these lessons to new lands. Byzantine art, literature, and architecture continued to inspire the world. The golden mosaics, intricate icons, and architectural innovations of Constantinople influenced Renaissance artists in Italy and beyond. Scholars fleeing the city brought manuscripts, philosophical texts, and scientific knowledge to Western Europe, catalyzing cultural and intellectual transformation. Marcus' children, educated in both the skills of trade and the wisdom of their elders, witnessed how the city's traditions informed new societies far beyond the Bosporus. Religion remained a cornerstone of Byzantine influence. The Eastern Orthodox Church preserved theological scholarship, liturgical traditions, and ecclesiastical governance that shaped faith practices across Eastern Europe and Russia. Citizens and clergy who survived the fall became custodians of this spiritual heritage, ensuring that Byzantine theology, rituals, and moral guidance continued to influence communities even under foreign rule. Law and administration also carried enduring lessons. The codification of Roman and Byzantine law influenced emerging European legal systems. Governance, bureaucracy, and civic organization from the empire provided templates for stability, civic responsibility, and justice in societies striving to balance order with citizen needs. Lucia's experiences in maintaining discipline, protecting citizens, and upholding law reflected these principles in practice, lessons that transcended the fall of the empire. Trade and economic networks forged under Byzantine rule persisted, linking Europe and Asia through routes once controlled by Constantinople. Merchants, artisans, and families carried knowledge of commerce, crafts, and finance to new regions. Marcus' bakery, though a modest family enterprise, exemplified the practical ingenuity that enabled ordinary citizens to contribute to economic continuity, adapting skills and knowledge to new contexts. The city's cultural and intellectual traditions provided a bridge to the Renaissance. Scholars introduced Greek and Roman texts, Byzantine philosophy, and scientific ideas to Western Europe. Artisans, inspired by Byzantine design, enriched painting, sculpture, and architecture. Families like Marcus carried oral histories, crafts, and moral lessons, embedding the empire's values in generations that lived far from the fallen walls. Even in exile or under new rule, citizens maintained civic and communal traditions. Communities preserved festivals, religious ceremonies, and education systems, ensuring continuity of identity and culture. Marcus' children and grandchildren, like countless others, became transmitters of Byzantine knowledge, teaching skills, crafts, language, and values that shaped local societies while honoring their heritage. The human stories of resilience endured. Lucius' tales of courage, Marcus' lessons of diligence, and families' efforts to maintain hope in routine demonstrated that survival required adaptation, community, and moral strength. These personal legacies intertwined with cultural, religious, and intellectual influences, creating a multifaceted heritage that informed not only Europe but the broader world. Even in modern cities, echoes of Byzantine urban planning, defense strategies, and civic organization remain visible. Markets, public spaces, and fortified architecture reflect principles refined over centuries in Constantinople. Citizens' daily lives, though altered by time, carry the imprint of a society that valued education, faith, civic duty, and resilience. Marcus' lessons about community, skill, and perseverance continue in spirit through countless descendants and cultural traditions. Faith, art, scholarship, law, and civic organization converged to form the enduring influence of Byzantium. Soldiers, merchants, scholars, and families all contributed to this legacy. The empire's fall did not erase its impact. Rather, it transformed, disseminated, and embedded itself in diverse societies. Lucius and Marcus' stories became symbols of human courage and adaptability, demonstrating that the endurance of values, culture, and knowledge is often more lasting than political power. By dawn in new lands where refugees and citizens settled, the lessons of Byzantium took root. Children learned skills, citizens rebuilt communities, and scholars preserved texts that would inform European thought for centuries. Marcus's techniques, traditions, and ethical guidance, alongside Lucia's discipline and strategy, found new expression in trade, military practice, and civic life. The Byzantine legacy is a testament to the human spirit. Empires may fall, borders may shift, and rulers may change, yet knowledge, culture, and resilience endure. Citizens, soldiers, and families carry these lessons forward, adapting to circumstances while preserving identity and values. Constantinople may have fallen, but its heartbeat persists in art, faith, law, scholarship, and the countless human stories that continue to inspire. And so, the story of the Byzantine Empire concludes not with destruction alone, but with enduring influence. Marcus' bread, Lucius' vigilance, citizens' courage, and families' perseverance became part of a living legacy. From the walls of Constantinople to the courts of Renaissance Europe, from Orthodox churches to scholarly halls, the empire's spirit lives on, teaching courage, resilience, wisdom, and the power of ordinary people to shape history and the modern world. The fall of Constantinople sent ripples throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Cities that had once been connected under Byzantine rule now found themselves navigating a new order, ruled by the Ottomans, while European powers watched and reacted to the shifting balance. Marcus, now older and experienced in both trade and survival, observed how his family and neighbors adapted to these changes. Markets adjusted, ships changed routes, and merchants learned new alliances, while soldiers like Lucius, or the younger men he trained, adapted their strategies under Ottoman oversight or migrated to other regions. The eastern trade routes were reconfigured. Constantinople had once been the hub connecting Europe and Asia, but now Venetian and Genoese merchants sought alternative ports and partnerships, while the Ottomans imposed new taxes and controlled key passages. Marcus' bakery, though small, reflected a larger reality. Citizens had to negotiate between opportunity and survival, maintaining livelihoods in an economy transformed overnight. Supplies came less predictably, and families had to adapt their daily routines to fluctuating prices and new regulations. Life in the streets remained vibrant yet cautious. Children played in alleys that echoed with both old stories and new influences. Neighborhoods maintained communal support systems, ensuring that even amidst political upheaval, daily life continued. Marcus' children learned not just the craft of baking but also diplomacy, negotiation, and cultural adaptability, skills necessary for survival in a shifting world. Soldiers who had once patrolled Constantinople's walls integrated into new armies or served as mercenaries, adapting tactics learned from decades of defending a city under siege.